All right.
Oh,
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the quarterly meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm going to ask our retiring Finance Director from the Board of Education, Ms. Bonnie McQuaid, to lead us in the pledge.
pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And you did it well. On a serious note, and a somber note, this board was just informed that unfortunately a teacher at North Stratfield School passed away overnight, Mrs. Nancy Hanlon. I'm not sure that we know how long she was a teacher in the district.
18 years.
18 years, according to Mr. Bolito, who had a son who went to North Stratfield, but that news came to the district this morning. So I'd ask that we hold a moment of silence for her and her family. Thank you. Tonight, in our quarterly review, we've got 7 items. Hopefully, we can get through relatively quickly. We've got to review the current state of the fiscal year 2011 budget and actuals as of March 31st. Review the fiscal year 2011 education budget to the actuals as of March 31st. To review the current status of the town pension funds as of the same date. Mr. Hiller is going to walk us through projected debt schedules as a result of all the authorizations through April 25th. We're going to see a brief review of the town's cash investment policy for operating funds. Review the recommendation of the Audit Committee on the appointment of an auditor for this year, and to charge the Budget Subcommittee to review the 2012 budget process, our so-called post-mortem review that we do at the end of each budget year. So those are the items on the agenda. I've got good news, or I've got bad news and good news. The bad news for me is I'm not feeling that well. The good news for you is I'll probably be more quiet than usual.
Less loquacious.
Yes, exactly. So with that in mind, any questions, comments, or concerns from board members? All right. Mr. Brown, I know, was traveling back, I believe, from Maryland and had some flight delay issues due to weather, but he hopes to be here during the meeting, and I have not heard yet from Mr. Kiley. So, Mr. Hiller, we'll turn it over to you to start the current status of the 2011 budget, and we have Ms. Gardner here as well. And you're welcome to join us up at the table if you'd like. So, go ahead, Mr. Hiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Gardner had put together what our seasonality report on our key accounts. I think it most appropriate that perhaps we commence, since this is the top of it, with revenues, if you'd like. I can pass out, I know it's at this point 4 weeks dated, but the comparative collections, March 31st, which is the most recent data that we have, over March 31st of last year. Hand these to Mrs. Claire. A comment that I will make on this, and Mr. Brophy wants to set to, or... That'd be great. Thank you. When you get this report, you will note that we are tracking ahead of last year's collection rate by a slight by 0.3%. The other comment that I did make, though, is that our delinquent list, which is attached here, and we don't update that as frequently until this time of the year, and it is on there as of January 31st. That will be updated as of Monday. And there's also the third page on the attachment, the people who have made payments that were originally on the January 31st list, who have made payments since that time, three
Mr. Cowan.
taxpayers. My concern is that there is an increase of close to $1 million as of March 31st on the, maybe Kylie needs one of these too, on the delinquent list. And in comparison to June 31st, one of the issues that we had, as you'll recall, is that last year we did affect a lien sale, and we're, at this time last year, threatening that. But we do not intend at this point to do that. I don't feel, nor does Mr. Flato feel, that we're in a situation we need it. However, I think should be noted to this board that close to $1 million higher as far as delinquents.
Can you define, so we're $1 million higher from June of last year?
From June 30th of last year. Now, that was a low point because, of course, we had shed all of those properties that were in the lien sale.
And how much were those properties that were in the lien sale, if you don't mind me?
Well, the RTM, when they adopted the language for the lien sale, had two parameters on that. First off, that they must be in excess of 1 year delinquent, and it must be in excess of $20,000.
Yeah, so what was the total amount that we sold?
Approximately $1 million was collected, but there was a lot of other monies that came in from what I'll term the threat of the lien sale.
Okay, but if they were, so after the lien sale, the net number was $1 million lower than this,
Correct.
but the lien sale.
Well, the overall number, that's
but the lien
whether a
sale
person
was-
is $10 delinquent or,
Understand.
In-
But the
in one
lien
case
sale, the lien sale was $1 million, though.
yes.
Therefore, we're pretty much flat.
Yes, but I think the other thing is that we could say is that the total on our top 25 list is running about 50% higher as far as absolute dollars. If you look at on page 2 of the handout, and granted that, this is as of January 31st, and when you realize that out of these 25 properties, only 3 have paid in the last, essentially, almost in about the last 85 days at this point, of February, March, and into April. That number, the 920 bottom number, could jump dramatically as of April 30th. When you realize that we have, we have some, what I'd have to term prominent properties on here in high-end neighborhoods.
Any questions from board members? Yeah, Mr. Stone?
When can we get an update? In other words, the taxes are due April 30th. Can we get one when we meet next? I'm
Yeah,
just-
you would have an update. I think we can have an update. Taxes we're in a collection period right now, obviously, under quarterly collections, and we should be able to give an update as of Tuesday night on both of these.
Mr. Tetro? Hello, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Hiller, on page 3 of the handout, there are 3 names, 3 addresses, 3 years, and no dollar amounts. It says these amounts were collected. Did they collect the whole amount, part of the amount?
My understanding is that they are off the list that in the second name there, as you'll notice, that would have been on the 2008 list, and so I don't believe the entire amount was collected on that particular property. I'm not certain on that, but I know on Mr. and Mrs. Smilo, I know that that was paid in full.
Okay, is there some reason that the amounts weren't included on this
It
page
just
3?
didn't print on the email, off the email.
Okay, just a formatting problem?
Mr. Hiller, what would be useful, and we probably can't get it for next Tuesday, but once we have a better breakdown of what's still outstanding, since we're in a collection period, it'd be great to actually get this list with some notes as to where it stands in the process, what if the homeowners, I assume someone's trying to collect this money.
We are making efforts, and in fact, I was with Mr. Saxel at lunch today, And we spoke about I'll call the top two properties on this, is to, Mr. Gorzolani, at my behest, did send a letter to the principal owner in the LLC at 1131 Sasko Hill Road. That letter was sent some 2 weeks ago. That is a private residence, and that number represents 2/4 of taxes.
Yeah. I think I think it would be important for us to get, the taxpayer, the address, the oldest, the list number, the total due, and then some notes on what collection efforts have been to date, so that we could know a little bit more.
Well, I think, as again, I spoke with Mr. Saxel at noon today, and some of them you can tell, depending upon the middle column there, the oldest list, as to how long they're delinquent, and some are quite some time. Some of them are matters that are in estates. We have, in some cases.
Yeah, I think we just need that
Yeah.
list. Just tell us what it is, I think, instead of kind of giving us the anecdotal. Yeah, Mr. Tetra?
I was going to move back to the current year levy if somebody else had a question on the past due.
Does anybody have anything on the past due? Let's go back to the current year, I'm fine with that.
What
You
happened
did have a question, I'm sorry. I
Mr.
did
Tetra
say-
saw my hand up, but you just addressed it, really. I was going to ask, first of all, I guess we can assume that this top 25 doesn't change too often. It's just basically
Well,
the
it
same
changed a
people.
lot last year. It changed, if you looked at it as of this date last year, in fact, you'll note that
Well, it changed because of the lien
there's a couple of
sale.
properties on
Was it a
here
lien sale? Okay.
that were removed from the lien, there's one property that was removed from the lien sale by action of the Board of Selectmen. There's other people who were in the lien sale, or potentially in the lien sale, paid down under the threshold. In other words, paid down under $20,000, and now they're back up there again. As I've said to people privately and publicly, we are not a cheap bank at 18%. And so, I think we will get the money, and we will get the money with the 18%. My concern is from a cash flow standpoint on this particular year, when we're almost $1 million over where we were 10 months ago, it is a concern.
I understand the concern, but you're comparing the apples and oranges because you're doing it after a lien sale, and you're saying, I sold $1 million, and look, now I'm $1 million higher. But I mean, you had sold $1 million, right? I mean.
But I'm getting 18% on the new $1 million,
Right,
too.
exactly. Right. Okay. Any other questions on this? Are you all set, Jim? Mr. Tetra?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hiller, back to page 1
Yes.
of the handout. Could you tell us what our takeaway should be? We're saying on one hand, our current year levy is running $750,000 under budget, and yet our collection rate, you're saying, is above last year's.
Correct. I think our takeaway is a couple of things. First off, two interesting points here. If you look at the second column of assessor's adjustments, which we've never budgeted for, we're saving $150,000 there. It's not a big number.
Could you tell us what page we're on, please?
On the first page, the comparative collections, second column where it says assessor's adjustments, $234,000. Those are people trading in cars, et cetera, or stuff like that. Last year, we were $384,000, and this year, we're at $234,000. So on a year-over-year, we're $150,000 better. Additionally, on the supplemental motor vehicle,
No.
the amount billed was beyond what we had anticipated. And so that's one of the reasons why in the mill rate projections for the coming year, we've upped significantly the amount on supplemental motor vehicle taxes. So I think those two things are working very much in our favor to offset some of the other negative. I think overall, we're in reasonably good shape here.
Okay, so at the end of the year, we're anticipating collecting the budget amount for our property taxes.
I'm confident that we're going to meet the target. One of the things to note is we will be sending out notices of intent to lien properties in roughly the second full week of May. That obviously, if people have been not forgetful, let's say, as far as paying their taxes, that notice gets results. And then because the notice would be that we would intend to lien the property as of June 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so current year levy, you're saying that you feel comfortable that we'll hit the number for the year
Yes.
based on what's going on? Prior year, you're running 491 better than budget? Prior year
Yes,
levy?
yeah. Prior year has been very, and that in a sense goes back to the, which doesn't show up on the handout that I just gave, but it does show up on the seasonality report that we had. We've had a very good year there. And frankly, that's the area that is, I think, giving us revenue flexibility, shall I say.
Let me ask a question on, I have one on that, and then go to you. It seems counterintuitive. It doesn't seem to work right to me. On the one hand, you're saying that you're concerned because our major delinquencies are up, and at this point in time, we're $1 million over where we were as of June last year. But then you're saying, but by the way, our prior year collections have been really good. So how can we be concerned and be $1 million worse than we were last year, but have our prior year collections being so strong?
I think what that is, and I see they're sort of in conflict.
Yeah.
Statements. We believe, and we haven't really studied this, that the reason for that is that there've been a number of properties that have sold in which there was some financial distress with people as a result of the economic situation, and they had, maybe in more modest homes, where there might have been a smaller delinquency and stuff like that, and that those homes have, for whatever reason, transferred.
So what it sounds like is concerning you is your credit risk with the larger homes that you're
Yeah.
building up
Yeah, as-
quite a
as you
balance
see
on the
this, you know,
top
you've got-
25 list.
Some pretty pricey homes that are around here, and you know the addresses as well as I do. When you see these addresses,
So what you're saying is the top end of our list is you've got a concentration of credit risk on the top end of your highest delinquencies.
it's not credit risk, I guess, because I'm confident that
I
we
understand
will
what
we
you're
will get
saying.
the money.
Right.
It's just as to when.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mr. Tetra, can I go back to you?
I think you asked the question, so I think I'm okay from that
Okay.
standpoint, but thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions on this one? Building permit revenue. We'll just go right down the list here.
Building permit revenue has some seasonal drag on it right now, or as of the date of this report, as of March 31st. We are confident that there does seem to be some pickup, which is seasonal. There are some larger projects that we anticipate within the next 60 days through the end of the year. It's a question of timing as to when some of these are coming in. The most prominent one, and the one that obviously everyone's been waiting for a while, is the foundation permit on the first building at the train station, which we anticipate any day. And then the full building permit for that. The rest are, it's dragging slightly.
Mr. Brown, and then I'll go to Mr. Tetra.
Just a question on what we're saying, we're anticipating the permit revenue, and then you name a couple of the places that we're expecting some permit revenue.
Right.
And you think that they're going to come in within 60 days. But do we ever check with these other groups for updates? Like, for example, St. Pius, because maybe something changed there.
I had a conversation with the building official, and he felt everything was coming in, but just slightly delayed because of the very bad snow period we had, and that put a lot of things off, that deferred a lot of things. But he felt with a good spring, that will just catch up in the fourth quarter. He felt confident these,
Which building contractor was, the one, you mean one that works at the town?
yeah, our
Mr.
our
Gilliland.
town building official, Mr. Gilliland.
So he feels that these projects will begin within the next 60 days, for example, St. Pius or Sacred Heart and
He couldn't guarantee anything, but he felt they were just simply deferred in the third quarter because of the snow, the heavy snow.
And I guess, just to follow up, are we expecting, or are we anticipating this revenue in order to hit our goal? And if this doesn't follow through, we will not hit our goal? Is that what we're saying?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Tetra, you had a question?
Yes. Mr. Hiller, the first item on here is, when we talk about we continue to anticipate revenue, is for the concourse building at the Metro Center. The First Selectman didn't kind of cover that in his update to the RTM the other night. Can you kind of step us through that in terms of?
Yeah,
what's
Mr.
going
Whittick
on?
has been in a couple of times during the month of April. He has met with the building department. The building department has met with his engineers and architects. He is required to build the concourse building. Mr. Gilliland's last comments with their architects is, as of last week, they gave a figure on the foundation permits for that, which we would anticipate, as I said, any day. I know there's a meeting tomorrow on the project. I know the figure that's been given just on the foundation permit is 13,000, but obviously the other permits that are attached to that building,
But are they building the building, I think is the
Yes.
question, right?
the intent is yes.
And they're going to start in the next 60 days. I mean, what has to happen? $13,000 doesn't seem like it's going to have a major impact on our
No,
building
no.
permit revenue for the year. Is this that big a number, or was this just a big project we put in there?
I
'cause
think what
was-
it is, it's, to use the cliche, it becomes the tip of the iceberg as far as, a much bigger permit for everything on top of those, that foundation.
How many dollars are we talking about hitting
I think
before
it
June
could be in the
30th?
six-figure number.
Before June 30th?
That I'm not certain of. I think I speak with certainty, according to Mr. Gilliland and his conversations with both Mr. Whittick and his architects, that we will see the foundation permit well before June 30th. I
And
think
is-
during the
con-
month of May.
Okay, the concourse building we're talking about has to do with just the train station itself. It's not part of the commercial
There's
development or
part
anything
of the
beyond that.
commercial developments. I believe it's, the concept was in the 80,000 square feet range, as far as the build-out on that.
Wow, that sounds like great news.
Mr. Polito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on the Metro Center and the Concourse Building, there were certain foundation walls, slurry walls, things of that nature that were contemplated when the train station was built in anticipation of further development, and basically they were done now because it couldn't be done later with the train tracks and the station being there. The foundation for the Concourse Building, was that one of those anticipatory projects?
It was anticipated, but those were not put in. You see, if you were to look at the site from the north side of the railroad tracks, if you
Right.
go down from where Mr. Flynn's offices are further past there, you'll see some foundation work which is not related. Those foundations, as I understand, were put in advance so that some of the environmental concerns could be handled at this time. And so those are foundations for future buildings.
Right.
But they are not related to the concourse or to the train station itself. To the full development, yes. And so those foundations have been laid and will support future construction.
Okay, so the Concourse Foundation it's a more immediate thing because
correct.
they're anticipating the building going up in short order. What is the financial status of the developer, and how has the ongoing lawsuit impacted the development of that particular building, if at all?
I don't think it has, I know he is still in negotiations with tenants, and that's frankly one of the reasons for the meeting tomorrow.
Does he have the money to put up the building?
With tenants, yes, I think.
With tenants. So he's got to get leases in place in order to build the building, essentially.
That's my understanding. I have not been closely involved in it.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. I wonder if the bank's okay with that, too, since he's getting his financing from there.
I think the bank has been party, along with the DOT.
Right. Ongoing discussions. All right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, let's go to conveyance. We're running 94,000 better.
94,000 better. I think the one thing there that you realize, if you look at, I have no question that we're going to meet budget as far as this is concerned this year. The one thing that will say, if you look in comparison with previous years, we did have an extraordinarily strong month of June, in which we collected close to 240,000, around 240,000 last June. That may be quite optimistic for this June, but nonetheless, I think we will see that money, we'll exceed budget as far as that's concerned.
Okay. Mr. Tetra, anybody else?
Just a clarification, Mr. Hiller, this says 555 sales recorded in Q3. Is that a year-to-date number, or is that just Q3?
No, I'm sorry, year-to-date, as of March 31st, as compared with 550
Be a 9-month number.
for the 9 months in the prior year.
All right, so this is basically saying, again, we're not seeing any impact of the short sales or foreclosures and the new state law that says that conveyance tax isn't collected on those types of sales.
That's right. It hasn't dramatically impacted our revenue lines.
I would say the impact is less than that.
Maybe from my previous comments, though, it may be impacting the delinquent tax revenue.
Right.
Not conveyance tax.
Right.
All right, any other questions on conveyance? Seeing none, we'll go to golf fees. This is just weather-related, Mr. Hiller?
It hasn't been a great spring so far. We opened ahead of when we thought we would. We opened on St. Patrick's Day, and the problem has been there has been, a lot of rainy Saturdays, and it has curtailed. Hopefully, we will get a break on, as far as that is concerned, shortly. But I think it's totally weather-driven. When they have been open, the good rounds, the rounds have been comparable on particular days to previous years.
Mr. Polito?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you say poor weather, is it because it's raining outside, or is it because the grounds are too saturated after it's rained to be playable?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's not so, they have to limit the use of carts.
Right.
As you're aware, we're in the process of a drainage program up there, and some people, it's not a flat course.
Right.
And so people who want to use the carts, and we make money on the carts.
Right.
So it's kind of a double whammy.
When all the drainage work is done that was just recently approved by the RTM, do they anticipate that some of the days that we're losing now we might be able to get back in future years?
That's the intent, that there should be a return on the investment there as far as that's concerned, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, let's go to the interest on investments.
That is down. It is down, and this has been an ongoing struggle. Later in the evening, we can discuss some of the investment policy. I think one of the things that we've all thought, and I thank this board for lowering both last year and this year the targets on that. I think one of the things that we have to realize too is that in the last 3 years, the rates have been down, and if you listen to Dr. Bernanke today, we're still going to be down for a while, maybe not that much longer, But I think the one thing that we have had in the past 3 fiscal years, we have had some gain as far as on the investments. I do not anticipate that this year. There will be some offsetting losses there. I think the other thing that I pointed out when we had budget discussions there is this is the account where historically we have absorbed banking charges. And these numbers are reflective of that.
And before Mr. Kiley's going to jump in here, I know, he's asked that we break that out separately
Yes.
going forward, so will we
Yeah.
do that in the future? So a separate account on that?
We are prepared to do that, yes.
Yeah, I think we probably should, right, Mr. Kiley?
Yeah.
Did we decide?
It's
do you
more,
want it as a
for the
counter
most
revenue?
part,
Do you want it as a counter revenue account as opposed to raising it in the expense side of the budget?
I guess you could do it either way. I was thinking of it as a gross up of the revenue and putting an expense in like an admin or finance account, but,
I'm afraid someone will try to cut it if we put it in expense.
Yeah.
so maybe a contra revenue account's a better idea. Net, as long as it's carved out so you can see what the gross interest income is and what the
I
bank
think one
charges
thing that
are,
I
I
could
think
do
we're
too
good to go.
is ask the bank, because one of the things that they have done the last 2 years is, and as you're aware, our primary bank is People's United Bank,
Yeah.
and they have just invoiced us on an annual basis. And so they've in a sense, carried us. And I would like to see it,
Is that reflected in this number?
yes, yes.
Yeah, I think we should do it as a counter revenue account.
Yeah.
In all seriousness. Put it
Yeah.
right
And
in
and do
below
it perhaps on a quarterly basis
Yeah.
as opposed to seeing it on an annual basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I might, a couple other things. You note in the account, there's 104,000 reversal of interest income accrued in June of last year. That would mean that it was a prior year adjustment to the financial statements from
Yeah.
the prior year, right? So this was an error in the financial statements of last year. The other thing is this up to date, this account now? When's this accounting through? 'Cause I-
It really only gets up, it is not up to date. It really only gets up to date on June 30th. We're making strides, I think, with the addition of new staffing in my office to get it more current.
So how far are we down, really? I mean, you're saying it's running 329 below budget. How far below budget are we going to be?
I think I think for the year, we're going to be in the 350. I think we're going to run right around there, below.
Mr. Stone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 126,000 charged for service, those are service charges? I didn't understand.
Essentially, yeah, there are all types of,
Bank
there's
fees.
a wide variety of charges. Wire charges, banks are always, for every type of transaction has some fee established to it. And I think one of the problems is the overnight rates that the banks are paying, which, as I've said several times here in the past, are frankly minuscule. The bank is coming in with their, and banks are beginning to come forward now with other products. They are coming in on, I have a meeting on Friday afternoon with People's, with three people from People's, our primary contact, and 2 other people on a new product for short money. And we're seeing that more and more. We're just beginning to see it, which is something which we saw 3 and 4 years ago and really just disappeared. To give you an example, we have some funds in the State Treasurer's Investment Fund, the acronym being STIF, which is the overnight account, which is an overnight account, which, for example, one of the revenue items is the educational cost-sharing grant. The state will deposit our educational cost-sharing grant in this account either Friday or Monday. I can't tell you exactly when. And that will be in excess of $1.5 million. That account is probably paying right now 25 basis points as far as short money. That's all it's paying. But at least it's something. Some of the banks, People's and all the other major banks are paying less than that on immediate overnight rates.
Yeah, Mr. Kiley?
May I
I'm
follow up?
sorry, can I, do you mind, Mr. Stone?
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Stone. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Stone's question. Mr. Hiller, the $126,000 of service charges, that's current year-to-date through 3 quarters?
That's actually, that's an annual charge that was for calendar, we were billed on a calendar basis for 2010.
Okay. So it's a flat fee bill for the year? You don't,
Not a flat fee, I mean, it's a compilation of many different fees for the various services that the town and Board of Education used for banking services. And, you know, it stands out now.
right.
It's always been there, but it was absorbed before when they were paying overnight rates of 3%. It
No,
didn't-
I understand the concept. So the 126 is an annual fee that we pay to the bank for various things throughout the course of the year,
Yes,
give or take. So back to Mr. Stone's question, I think you were going that that's a lot of money.
Right.
And I guess I would go there as well, and I would ask the question, you know, have we shopped our banks in the last 5, 10 years? And are these rates, or are these fees in line? Are they high, are they low? Do we know?
we have not shopped our rates. I think it's not inappropriate to do that. I think, you know, I think that, and certainly other communities have done that. I know the city of Bridgeport is just in that process as we speak. I've had calls as a reference on People's United Bank from other communities who have done it. I think we're not limited. I think you know, we can't go to every bank, frankly. I think we've got to, you know, there's probably half a dozen banks in.
But we haven't shopped it, is the answer.
I'm sorry?
We have not shopped it, is the
No.
answer. And we should.
I just don't know if 10K a month is higher.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's not a flat rate, though.
Right.
That's based on transactions.
That's
So it's
correct.
volume.
How
that's
much
tra-
each deposit costs something,
Right,
each,
yeah.
But I want to go back to Mr. Stone, just to make sure you weren't cut off, sir, with your question.
No, you were going right where I was going.
Floor is yours.
The other thing, I mean, in this world right now, everything's negotiable,
yes.
so it really should be shopped.
We can prepare, you know,
It's not an insignificant figure anymore.
no, it is not an insignificant figure. And I think there's other factors we have to realize, but I think in most of the banks, and I think we all, you know, whether it be, you know, we all know which banks we'd be looking at right now. It'd either be Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America, People's, Webster, or TD. I think those would be the 6 that we'd be looking at locally for.
Yeah, Mr. Stone?
Do we ever go, I'm sorry, do we ever go out of the area, out of the state?
We're restricted in some cases by statute as far as that's concerned. We have gone, we have some banking relationships with other banks in Connecticut. For example, we have an account with Farmington Savings Bank, purely because they were offering a good rate. We have accounts with other local banks, Bank of Fairfield, Fairfield County Bank.
But could we go Bank of Arkansas, say, or something?
No.
No.
Well, I think one of the things that you have to realize too, I mean, we've got to, you know, we and the Board of Education, and I think we would do this together, also have people who physically have got to go to banks. And so I think that's why I say, you know, I don't want to go to a bank that has one branch in Fairfield, frankly. I don't want to limit that. And the 6 banks that I listed have more than one branch in Fairfield. And, you know, we have to have, we've consolidated at the town hall, for example, in the 2 buildings at town hall, we've consolidated our deposits. There's a police car that drives daily with the deposits from both buildings in the morning. Don't want to get in much greater detail than that, but
It's all right.
What street did it take? More than we need to know.
Yeah.
And
Let's
I think, you know, the question is
let's move on. Thanks.
one of convenience.
Thanks, Mr. Hiller. Let's go to Mr. Tetro. He has his hand up next.
All right. Mr. Hiller, if I understand this right, there was a reversal of $104,000 of income that was accrued in June of last year. I think it was the prior year transaction that Mr. Flynn referred to. I'm looking at the budget book, and there was $732,000 in total interest for 2010. What we're saying is really $628,000 and change. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that seems like a relatively big transaction for that amount of money for an annual basis. And kind of two things. Not only does it misstate last year, but we based this year's budget number on last year's actual or projected. So we kind of got a double whammy there in terms of what it does to us. Did we, have we determined what caused that, and are you confident that we won't have that kind of
I think so, and
adjustment in the
I'd have
future?
to check with Mrs. Bossy for further detail on that.
So we don't know what caused that.
I'd have to check with Mrs. Bossy to get the full detail on that. And I can report back on Tuesday evening, give you,
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think my concern is that from a process standpoint,
that we don't see this.
in the past, whatever happened, happened, but it would be nice to know we're not going to be confronted with something of that magnitude in the future.
Well, let's play this out, because following up on that logic, the explanation here, and I'd like to get an understanding of this better, would mean that our accounting in this account is actually quite poor all along, because if you look at, you have $100,000 overage on the revenue side, and if you take and say we had $125,000 worth of expense that were actually annualized, so 6 months of that expense was related to last year as well. So following that same logic, not only are you at 650,000 as opposed to 750,000, you're actually closer to 600,000, because another 60,000 or so, and I'm using round numbers here, should come off the top for those bank fees that weren't charged.
That's assuming you don't give prior year credit to the prior year. for
Exactly,
having fully
and
charged that,
exactly
so-
right, and that's why the account has to be torn apart
Yep.
to understand, because there's two timing issues here, because you could have had the same timing issue on the revenue. You could have had a,
I'll report back on Tuesday with the full
Yeah,
detail on the
that-
transactions
what we really
and the
need is
like,
kind of a
and
roll
what
forward.
likelihood there is for similar
account
transactions.
needs to be reconciled.
Yeah, is Tuesday enough time to pull all that together?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Tetra. Mr. Brockville?
Paul, if I ask a question that you're planning to discuss at the later part of this,
Go ahead. I don't know if what the chair wants to do
yeah,
on
I'm
it,
just
but
to
I've
say,
got-
so, feel free to tell me, you'll bring it up. I just want to know, and as a full disclosure, I've been working with Paul and Ken on trying to rationalize this account, and I appreciate it. They've been totally forthcoming here, so thank you. The numbers we're hearing, this is a little technical, but there are some mark-to-market issues, right, with the account. Is that also
Correct, and
being-
I think
is that-
I
yeah.
alluded to that in my comments earlier. We are restricted, as you're aware, by state statute as to what we can invest in. However, we do have a number of investments in what I'll broadly call government-backed securities, municipal bonds, both in Connecticut, out of side of Connecticut, and other agencies, treasuries, Ginnie Mae's, other collateralized or debt instruments, which fit within the statute, which is confining as far as Connecticut is concerned, and for most states, and for good reason. Realize, though, with that at any given time, we do have interest rate risk. We have interest rate risk with the United States Treasuries, as we're well aware what happened last week with Standard & Poor's. We do have, at this point in time, if we were to close the books today, we do have losses on some of those investments that are within the general fund.
So, Paul, just to keep things moving, so the only question I have for you is, and thank you, that's an explanation everybody, I think, appreciates, is are those losses, assuming that the world didn't change between now and June 30th, are those losses reflected in this
No.
estimate? They're not?
No.
So what would you say is the again, if we froze.
Nor is all of the income, because you see, some of the income is
Right.
not, and again, this was a March 31st picture.
No, I
and
understand.
Stuff like that.
But
So-
if we, and I don't know the answer to this question, if the markets, let's just say for whatever reason, interest rates didn't change a smidge between now and the end of our fiscal year, which is possible, though unlikely, how much losses are you going to have to book, both on the stuff you've sold out and the stuff that we may still own but has to be marked to off, which would be a negative against us?
Probably in excess of $250,000, and the numbers that I've given are the numbers that I've stated are reflective of the earnings on top of that, though. And so what I'm saying, when I stated before that I thought that I gave a figure of $350,000, I believe, as far as that's net of everything, net of losses.
Of the two, so you think that we can have a $650,000 net interest income?
Yes.
Including the $250,000 of write-downs?
Correct. Now, that's an estimate. I mean,
Okay.
that can change.
I mean, I don't see how that could be, maybe I'm just not.
Well,
doing the math.
one of
I
the
don't-
problems we've historically had with this is picking up off the reports, because we're not picking up anything as far as accrued income.
Right.
We're not, we have in excess of $10 million in certificates of deposits at local banks, which are not always reflective here. We don't post it monthly. And so the difficulty has been in tracking that. We frankly don't do a good job in tracking the income on this account.
Right, and I don't want to get into that, because we're
Right.
working on that, and hopefully there's going to be, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I just want to make sure the board has an idea of what the number is going to be. I'm just a little confused. It shows us being at 421 through three quarters. That's what,
Right.
I'm just looking at the sheet. And if there was a $250,000 reversal due to market, that would bring it down to 420 minus 250 is what, 170? 170. So you're saying that we have interest income that's going to come in?
That hasn't been booked.
That's like
in
$400,000 or $500,000?
a number of various accounts, in other words. And I think, again, this is the concern that I've had. We're trying to improve our
No, I
our
understand.
reporting within that, as far as taking, whether it's accrued income, and as I said, historically, it only been done.
But and I'll finish with this. Again, I'm only beating this because I want to make sure the board knows where we stand and where we're going to end up.
Correct.
What you're saying, and I'm not doubting you, I'm just saying, so I understand it, is that there could be $400,000 or $500,000 of interest to be posted between now and the end of the
Right.
fiscal year because of the reasons you've stated.
Delay, or
Okay.
not the delay, well, yeah, delay.
I understand why,
To your point, you're going to need that because what you're concerned
to get
about
back to
is
650.
to get back to 650, because
Right.
you
Right.
haven't recognized the mark-to-market.
Right.
But there's also some level of interest income that you haven't recognized.
That's right,
yet.
and I understand that. I just want to make sure, but that's a big number, so I don't,
No, I'm where you are.
Okay.
I understand exactly
Okay.
where you're going, yeah.
okay, thank you.
And how many months of interest income haven't been recognized, though? That's the question.
I'm sorry?
How many months haven't been recognized? I mean, the issue here is,
It varies on which account. It varies on each account, and it also varies on which instrument in an account, as to.
I understand that, but if you were to ballpark, how far are you behind on
I
reconciling
would think in the
this?
60 to 90-day range lag, potentially.
That seems like a heck of a lot of
Yeah,
interest.
and in defense of Mr. Hiller, Mr. Chairman, in defense of Mr. Hiller, I mean, this whole system can be improved, and we're working on it, but
Right.
it isn't easy, because the way these CDs pay, they don't pay on a monthly basis
Right.
in many cases, so it's very difficult for them to necessarily have it all the way up to date, although they could estimate it. And
Well, I think the one thing that I could say,
I
Ken,
was more
is
concerned
that
on the
I
time
think
frame,
with,
because I don't know how much play
with
we
the
have.
statements from the brokerage houses that we deal with and stuff like that, we can take cognizance, or better cognizance of the, I don't say we book it, and I think this becomes an accounting issue, at least going through the year of the accruals that are within that account, because the accrued income, because if we buy an instrument, we're paying some interest out on it, because, or if we sell something, we may get something back too. So, the way that, when it comes in, because a lot of these are, semi-annual interest, and it's when it falls in, and it's all over the lot.
All right, let's move on. now.
Chair, just
Yeah.
to close, the bottom line, for where we expect this number to be on June 30th, was that 350 or was that like 600?
350,
Okay, so that means we're going to be short of our estimate by about $700,000.
Wait, are you saying we're going to be down 350?
down 350.
Okay,
Right.
Mr. Chair, what we expect it to be at 650, that's the revenue that we expect to bring in, not the 350, but
That's what I
650.
heard Mr. Hiller say.
Yes,
I want to hear him say it again.
it's recorded,
Yes. Is that correct?
yes,
So you
That's-
expect the shortfall to be 350?
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. I think we need to, along with the analysis we're doing on the investment parameters here, I think we do need to take a look at the accounting to make
Yep.
sure that we have the timing
Oh, absolutely.
differences in it. You've got an FYI here, state revenue not represented in key accounts is 350 better. How convenient that is.
I
Than
think
budget.
and obviously, roughly two-thirds of that is from the one that we spoke of that came in last, late summer, early fall, the video competition trust grant. Virtually everything in the state area is coming in on schedule. As I indicated just a few moments ago, we would anticipate the receipt of the last 50% of the ECS grant. And it's usually due April 30th, so I don't know whether they're going to deposit it Friday night or Monday night, but I would anticipate not later than Monday, we would see that from the state. And it's a lot of money, but, you know, when you consider the city of Bridgeport had to borrow $35 million in anticipation of that grant, and then their notes due on Tuesday, I think the state better pay it.
Yeah. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staying on state revenue for a second, what's not noted in here is that the Pequot Fund is pretty low, only 30% allocated so far this year.
Yeah, and that one, there was money that came in on April 1st on that, so it's not reflective here. And
April 1st?
Part of that is seasonal, some of it we won't see until July 1st, which is accrued back to their, I could give you the schedule as to when the state grants come in, but there is a
most every
schedule
other-
on that.
most-
And
most
Pequot, I
everything
know,
else under that
Pequot, I
general.
know is a June 30th payment,
It is, okay.
yeah. Not all of it, but a portion of it.
No, like you said, it's 30% allocated already. so-
Yeah, that's not an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments on these items? Seeing none, the town dump scale, we can
Since
read
Mr.
the
Flato's going to be
explanation.
in charge of that soon, we should probably be able to maybe get some expedited payments there.
Somehow I don't think so, but that's okay.
I suspect you're right.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this?
On all revenue now?
Well, let's go to town dump scale first, and then we'll go back to that, Mr. DeWitt. This is the same thing we've been dealing with all along.
Yeah, this is one, you know, revenue's down, expenses down. The interesting one on this one, and this is for another night, is that we are going to be going on July 1st to what is called single-stream recycling. There was a meeting, a CRA came in last week and had a meeting with all the haulers in town, and all residents will be able to greatly expand their recycling efforts. Now, you know, you're supposed to put glass bottles and plastic stuff that has 1 and 2 on it. You can now go all the way up to number 7 as of July 1st. And everything else other than real garbage, food garbage and stuff like that, can go into the bins. And so I suspect our tonnage on this could drop dramatically as far as solid waste is concerned.
What's that going to do to us having to cover the fixed costs?
Good question. I mean, we're not covering the fixed costs now, as we know.
Hence my point.
And I think, you know, it's something that other parts of the state are going to. We're not the last ones to go to it, but it's called single-stream recycling. there are possibilities of taking, of a different type of curbside container, which are expensive.
No, but I guess my point is, that starts June of this year?
July 1st.
Okay, July 1st, so do we have a budget hole now in this area for next year? And do we know what the size of that budget hole is yet?
Well, we have a budget hole in a sense that we've got a revenue hole because we haven't been collecting the tonnage. Conversely, we haven't been paying CRA to do this, to take our MSW, municipal solid
No, I
waste.
understand how that works, but I thought what we had heard was there's a certain fixed cost of running the operation regardless
Correct.
of CRA costs. So there's a certain percentage of our costs that are variable, and then there's the fixed percentage, and the more the variable goes down, given we weren't covering the fixed anyway, the bigger your hole on the fixed costs. So I guess what I'm asking is, do we know yet, or have we analyzed yet, what size of hole you're going to have on the fixed costs?
We have not, and I think we've got to do that, and it's really just the determination, though it's been coming for a while. I know I had conversations back in the wintertime with the first selectman in Easton to see just what, they were trying to see what we were going to do on the same, we felt an obligation from an environmental standpoint to go there. And so we are going there. And obviously, I think you're going to see a lot of publicity in the next 60 days on single-stream recycling. But we have not done, nor do I believe the department has done, any analysis on the impact.
Is someone going to be doing it in
I think
relatively,
we've got to, yeah.
let's say, before Monday?
That I don't know. I can check with Mr. Bowman and Mr. Zimbruski, who've been involved with this.
I don't know what the RTM can do about it, but I think they should know that this is a risk area to the budget on the expense side when they're voting on Monday night. I'd want to know if I were them. We
Sure.
didn't have this information when we voted. Mr. Tetra?
Two things. First of all, thank you to the Finance Department for putting the expenses and revenues together on this item so we can have this discussion tonight. So thank you very much for doing that.
Good suggestion.
Second, Mr. Chair, and perhaps you can look into this for Tuesday night, is that there is a revenue issue with this. So that as much as we put them together on this report, they're not technically together. If there is a revenue issue on this, can we comprehend that in the mill rate that we set on Tuesday night? Because technically, this is new information on the revenue side.
Good point.
So perhaps we can adjust it that way if it's significant, but I think it's, given the impact not only next year, to know how significant that is, I think it's very important that we have that information before our meeting Tuesday night.
I agree. Mr. Polito?
Who made the decision to go to the single stream here in town?
Basically, the 12 towns which we're in a consortium with, I'll take that back. There were some towns that opted out. Shelton, I believe, opted out. And I was deeply involved in this a couple of years ago when we were renegotiating the contract with Wheeler Brader on the burn facility. I have not been as closely involved in this, and frankly, the management of the CRA board, which I used to attend on a fairly regular basis, the CRA regional board, which was once 19 towns, has now evolved into, with the new contract, has evolved into the chief elected officials of each community. Pulling them together has not been quite as easy.
So the decision to opt out, are you then saying that that would be under the purview of the chief elected official of the individual towns?
I believe so, because I know, I've had, as I say, I had conversations with Mr. Herman, and I've spoken with 3 chief executives, myself, Mr. Herbst, Mr. Herman, and Mr. Loretti, on this matter.
I guess what concerns me is the fact that this opt-out option was not considered, or the impact of this single-stream recycling on the budget and on our revenue. I don't know if it was considered or not, because while environmentally it's a great idea and certainly philosophically I would be in favor of it, it's creating a real problem at a late date for us. I'm wondering why we're finding out about this right now, and what was the thought process of our chief elected official in terms of not opting out of this?
I think, I was not, I'll be honest, I was frankly not aware that it was as imminent as, until I happened to walk in on a meeting last week and saw CRA officials in the first floor conference room with Mr. Zabruski, Mr. Bowman, and I'd have to say virtually every hauler in Fairfield. And I'm sure that the Solid Waste Commission has been involved with that. But I haven't been at a meeting in 6 or 8 months, personally.
I think it's very important that we understand, and that the RTM understand for Monday night, what the potential financial impact of this is on the 2012 budget. I don't know if there's things they might want to consider on Monday night. Certainly, there's things, depending on the size, that we might need to consider on Tuesday night for the mill rate discussion. I don't think any of us are opposed to, philosophically, to what's going on here in terms of
Being green.
being green and environmentally friendly and all that.
Crossing is green, too.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I think that's the issue.
yeah, but I think we need to understand the financial implications of that, and I'm, for one, surprised if there hasn't been.
I wasn't aware
Some
personally that
calculation
it
of
was
that.
as imminent, because the last meeting I was at, which is, I'd say, was probably at least some 6 months ago, was more a discussion on the facility in Stratford, which has been the recycling facility.
I remember you mentioning something like that in previous meetings.
And frankly, the ownership of that and the rebuild of that, and also getting other facilities permitted in the region. And this was the issue that I know that Mayor Loretti had in Shelton, and I believe the city of Milford also had with it, as far as were there competitive facilities that would be fully permitted
Well,
by
it's-
DEP?
Yeah, but it's a moot point now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a moot point. Let's not belabor, we've been on these items for an hour. Questions, comments, concerns on any of the specific revenue items that Mr. Hiller's touched on? If not, let's stay on revenue. Mr. DeWitt, you might have some questions I thought you mentioned before.
Yes, please.
Sir?
Well, thank you, Mrs. Gardner, because this list pretty much hit all my big hitters, except for two under miscellaneous. There's I know there's some reason we did this, and I don't remember why, frankly. Miscellaneous town clerk, under 08 miscellaneous 42356, the very first line, 1%. That budget, that revenue line went from 50,000 in last year's budget, which, by the way, we only collected 4% of that 50,000 year before. Now we're at 200,000.
I think we just aggregated all the miscellaneous expected revenue. Right, Paul?
Yeah,
Yeah, we
we
just
have
aggregated.
historically always, and we've always just kind of dumped the revenue estimate line into two departments, finance and town
Finance, right.
clerks.
And
I think,
last,
I think the key thing here is if you look at it, I look at it from a total
Right. At the bottom.
miscellaneous area, and we had estimated $250,000 in revenue, we've taken in $255,000.
well, I just look at it from a last year's end-of-year perspective, and the miscellaneous town clerk and the finance combined generated 5.1% of the revenue it was supposed to, bringing the total to only 48%. So we had a total, between those two lines, of 250,000 of revenue. We've got the same this year, they're only flopped.
Right.
And we're running like the same, we're running about the same, we're on track to be about 5% again. So I'm kind of curious why. And those budgets went up. I mean, 2 years ago, they were very low. They were like, well, no, I guess they weren't.
They've historically been,
Miscellaneous is,
it's always
finance,
been
right?
$250,000.
Yeah. But the last 2 years, we're not reaping a whole lot of benefits from that miscellaneous.
And it's a
right?
question as to what we get in, there was a couple of years ago when we had settlements from insurance settlements and stuff like that, where this was dumped into this account and had it, if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, there were significant insurance settlements that were in these accounts
Yeah.
that put them way over.
Maybe it's a byproduct of the economy, I don't know, but like I said, the last 2 fiscal years, at least in this book that we have here, we haven't made it. So that might be something for our budget subcommittee, actually. I made a note of it just to look at that, so. Okay, thank you.
Is that it, Mr. DeWitt?
That's it.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns on specific revenue line items? Seeing none, Mr. Hiller, from myself, where are we going to come out the year on total budgeted revenue versus what you had,
I anticipate right now, and this is the crystal ball and just, without really sharpening the pencil, I think, first off, as you're well aware, have been aware for over 90 days, we had a significant overage in the snow removal accounts. We were granted by the president the applications for FEMA. I was at the Public Works Garage earlier today. And this also reflects some on the Board of Education. The town side, that application is for 35,000, I believe, which we're confident that we were probably going to receive virtually all of from the federal government. I think that if you go net with every single department, we're going to be ahead. I'm confident that
on revenue?
I'm sorry?
On revenue.
On revenue and.
How
and
much
under
do you think
expense.
we're going to be ahead?
I'm sorry?
How much do you think we're going to be ahead?
Overall on revenue, depending upon the tax issue, because one of the difficulties here, when you're getting 90% of your revenue on one line, if I could crystal ball that one, I think we could be $1 million ahead on revenue,
Okay.
with the caveat of the tax issue and particularly some of the larger delinquent issues,
Okay.
taxes.
Any other questions, comments from board members on revenue? Thank you, Mr. Hiller, Mrs. Gardner. Let's go to expenditures. Let's quickly go down here. Let's read the descriptions in the effort of time, and if we have questions, we can ask them. Okay. Legal services. Question there? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to workers' comp. We've talked about this. We continue to run over.
I'm sorry, that's Mr. Sasko's account, right, legal services?
I'm sorry?
That's Mr. Sasko's account, legal services?
Saxel,
Legal
yes.
services, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, workers' comp, we're over budget and continue to run over budget.
Yes.
No worse than what we thought, but still.
Hasn't accelerated.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
I just have a question on that last sentence about the escrow and the claims handling service, and there's a new method. Is that why there's a $125,000 fee?
One-time cost, and it will not occur again, yes. That's when we switched
It's
over.
really not, it's more a deposit. They want to make sure that we've got those funds on
Prepaid.
deposit with them at any given time for
So
service.
it's not really a fee? They use that to pay the workman's comp?
Yeah,
Right.
they're
It
drawing
was
against
The
that.
first time we established it, now we continue to provide it as they draw down on it.
Okay. And is there a plan for them to address this board at all? Have they come before us?
We haven't, Mr. Perno is willing to come in here. Mr. Flynn and I've had a couple of different conversations. I think maybe we could have Mr. Perno in at any time. He's more than cooperative as far as coming in, and perhaps at a June meeting or something, we could have him come in.
Thank you.
The next two accounts, health insurance active, health insurance retiree. Let me ask you a question on this before I turn it over to everybody else. It's not that our expenses are better than budget, it's that our claims are better than budget in these two areas right now, correct?
Yeah, the claims experience.
Right, which means this could be a betterment. In the insurance retiree, it'll be better in the trust fund, right?
Yes,
And in the insurance active, this will be better in the internal service fund,
correct.
should it continue.
Should it
And this
continue
could-
for the next, and this was on figures that we really had, we've seen now the March 31st figures, and
Right.
there is continued improvement.
Good. Mr. Tetra?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in both of these, but primarily the retiree insurance, right? is that going to have an impact this year, or is that going to be rolled into the actuaries, and when they recalculate this, will
It's
that
really
impact
going
us next
to,
year?
that's got a full year lag on it. So really where it's going to have an impact is when we get the estimates from the actuary for the fiscal 13 contribution into the plan, that's where that should show the improvement.
Okay, so this is previews of coming attractions.
Correct.
All right, so it's not, we're not going to have we're not picking up $1 million in this year.
No, we're not picking up because we're funding fully into the trust fund. And I remind you that it is an irrevocable trust fund. So once it's in there, it's there.
It's our experience, what you're saying is it's our experience that's better by this amount right now.
Correct.
So that's kind of a next year issue.
it
Second, on the
maintains,
health insurance actives, is that the same type of thing, or is this part of the self-insurance portion that we're not paying out? So will this impact this year, or does that get rolled into our
As I said one
internal
time, I think, to
service fund
some of the press,
calculations?
we've stopped the bleeding. And I think that there's improvement here. We're not going to, as you've been aware of over the last 60 days of all the discussions we've had here, this isn't going to turn around overnight, but we're making progress.
Nope, but this is part of our internal service fund, so in essence, we'll get the benefit of that
The internal services will
improved
have the benefit
experience
on it. Correct.
next year in terms of what our calculated contributions are. Thank you.
Any other questions on those two line items? All right, seeing none, we'll go to another FYI, unemployment compensation. Again, this was an adjustment we did at the budget based on the trending, and this just seems like more of the same on the unemployment side, correct?
Right.
Questions, comments from board members? Yes, and now our favorite one, fire payroll overtime expenditures. Yes?
Just, if I'm adding these two, we're 33K over, and we expect to spend another 30K in the next quarter. Does that mean we're going to be 60K over? On a
Probably not less than,
$120,000 budget, so we're basically going to be, finish the year plus 50% up on that expense category.
Correct.
Which is what I think we modeled.
Yeah, we modeled it because I think we were budgeted at 125, and we're going to be up in the 180 to 200 range.
Sure. Which I think, Mr. Tetro, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is an area that was historically under budgeted, and we fixed that.
Yes.
I mean, the 120,
Well, it's also
Fine.
been one, for many years, it's been an area which has been very difficult to budget.
Understand.
I warn you on this one, even with fixing it. And Dr. Title, I think, has mentioned this, that, with the cuts, with the $2,025,000 cut that
yep,
the Board of Education is facing prior to Monday night, that there could be staff layoffs in the Board of Education, which could impact this account.
yeah, we talked about that. That's right.
Mr. Chair, again, just so, there are certain of those things that can't be impacted. If the RTM is going to make budget adjustments, and they can't raise accounts, so they can't compensate for this in any way, is there some way for Tuesday night we can get a list of those accounts that are like this, that because of a budget cut,
Take them all. I'm sorry.
understand? Want to make sure we
You're
have our
looking
lives
for what
saved.
now for Tuesday night?
For Tuesday night, is it possible for any other accounts that are similar to this,
Okay.
where the budget cuts that are being made will cause an overage someplace else, that this board could be made aware of at least the major impacts? I'm not looking to a detail down to the penny or certainly anything like that. But, so this board is aware of where we're anticipating overages or that haven't been comprehended in the budget due to those cuts.
Yeah, so I guess what the question, first of all, I agree with the commentary, and second of all, I guess another way to phrase it would be if we know that there's going to be a $1 million cut, but we know the impact of that $1 million cut could be X number of positions, the calculation of unemployment insurance on that number of positions is Y. We need to know that you're going to have an expense of Y that's going to bring this account over.
Well, or we need to, at some point, we're going to need to cover that some way. Since we
That's what I'm
can't
saying.
adjust the budget
Right.
anymore,
Right.
we may choose not to, but I think this board needs to make an informed decision about whether we
Right.
take the action we can take at that point.
I think it's a very fair point.
And
That's something we
the
talked
only
about
remedy
earlier
that
during
you're
our budget
left with on
deliberations.
Tuesday night is in the mill rate, which, forces you into that situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's go to fire payroll and overtime expenditures here. Again, our favorite topic. One bit of nomenclature here, if you don't mind, because this OT vacancy, and then you have fourth ladder rescue. It's not the fourth ladder rescue, though, because you're throwing a whole bunch of other stuff in there at this point. Either that, or there's no way in heck you're over budget here.
Or was that the only item budgeted, is the question?
It's,
It might be the only item that was budgeted, but it's not what the account is any longer, if you're using it for other stuff.
well, they're using, I think there's two counts, and I had,
Well, let's say you're using it because
no, I had wanted to, and Mrs. Gardner will remember back in the old system, when we first went 2 years ago to the ladder rescue on, what I'll call, I think it was about a 5-week basis, probably in January. I'm sorry?
I don't, but it doesn't,
For
it doesn't
a short
matter.
period. And we did put into, and I could pull up the old sheets where we did put in a 7th overtime line, which I had created for specifically for the ladder rescue. And then I was directed to get that out of there.
No, but and I understand that. So my point becomes that this is the OT vacancy account, not the fourth ladder rescue truck account. Because you're not just putting the costs related to the fourth ladder rescue truck in here. You're putting overtime costs related to vacancies in here as well.
Yes, yeah, because the
That's all I'm saying.
the ladder rescue didn't start in this fiscal year until
Yeah, because
September.
anybody who looks at it like this says, how the heck is the fourth ladder truck costing us $125,000 more than we thought it was going to cost, or $150,000 more than we thought it was going to cost us 3/4 of the way through the year? And it can't be, right?
That's correct, and I think the point there is if you were to look back when there wasn't a fourth ladder rescue, which was back in June and July, for example, there were still expenses in this account.
And that's my point. I mean, we're saying the same thing, but it's disingenuous to put here OT vacancy and then in parentheses fourth ladder rescue truck, because it's not, right? You basically have a line item here that's $288,000 over budget, covered by other accounts that are 140 under budget, so you're $148,000 over budget in overtime related to vacancies for the fire department now, right? Okay, and it says, I don't want to cut my colleagues off, I'll be real quick here. It says by the end of the year, we're still going to be at 150,000 over. And so we're at 148,000 over now, so you don't expect to be any worse off in this account at the end of the year?
I think that one of the problems that I've always said on this is the seasonality, particularly on the vacation overtime line, because a lot of the seasonality that is in the last 60 days of the year when the guys use up their vacation time, and then you've got to fill those positions. So
Right.
you're backfilling for vacation times. So there is seasonality, which we're beginning to develop through the new system, to see, how much seasonality on vacation is in the last 60 days of the year, and there appears that there's a lot.
It'd be great if we had monthly budgets, wouldn't it? Mr. DeWitt.
I guess as a planning function, I don't know if I've said this before, maybe, probably. If they know in the last 3 months of the year that there's going to be people on vacation, why can't they just schedule people who are not on vacation, so we're not on an overtime basis? And not allow people, this, this happens at my work, where it's not a critical, function of a community. If there are 10 people in a group, 8 people can't be on vacation this week. Sorry, it just happens that way.
Your problem-
5 can, and the other 5 can back them up. 8 can't. Yeah, but it's, it's also a job, right? It's also a responsibility that has to be filled, and what we end up doing is backfilling it with an overtime rate. I tell you, that seasonality thing to me is just, that's not an excuse. Totally not
Well,
an excuse.
I don't
for-
say it's
for
an excuse,
absolutely
and I'm not personally using an excuse, because I know it's there, and I think the other problem is, though, is that you have two things. You got two parts of a labor contract. one which requires 23 men on duty at any given time. As we sit here right now, there's 23 firefighters on duty,
Right?
period. So you have the minimum manpower clause. You have the fact also that they are allowed under contract various, depending upon their seniority, various number of vacation days in any
Right.
given year. And if they haven't used them, it's a use it or lose it type of thing. And so, there have been occasions where there has been agreement to carry forward limited, very limited numbers of vacation days, in the case of some people. But so you get into a situation where if a guy's got 10 vacation days left, and it's, April 27th, he's going to burn those 10 vacation days between now and June 30th.
I mean, we'd be better off paying them for straight time and having a guy in straight time covering them than we were paying the time and a half. I mean,
That's what the ops audit said, hire another guy.
yeah, right. It's, right?
But your question at the time, if I might.
Yeah.
Your question at the time, Mr. DeWitt, which I understand we're still waiting for, was what's the cost of that straight-time person if we hire him? How do you comprehend pension, retiree medical, as well as the other benefits into
Right.
that? I think you asked that right after the ops audit was presented, and I think you're still waiting for the answer. And I thought that was an excellent question, by the way.
I think
And
we were
where
just
is the
waiting for
answer?
that.
Connie Nolfi and Tom Bremer have been working on some figures there.
So when can we get the answer?
Before the next budget, but I think you want it sooner. And I think really, again, there's contractual issues, though, that you,
But I'm with-
because,
Mr.
You know,
Chair?
and the other problem is also.
Where's the, when can we get the answer?
Just to be clear, Mr. DeWitt's question wasn't about coming up with another calculation. It was about how the ops audit people arrived at the conclusion that adding a body was cheaper than paying overtime.
They should just be able to
They
pull it
should
out of the
already have
report.
that. They should go to their documentation, pull out their spreadsheet, email it down here. We should have it tomorrow. There is
The-
absolutely no reason they didn't do that calculation before reaching that conclusion. That is one of the reasons that their report lacks a certain amount of credibility. If they can't do a simple straight time versus overtime calculation, which every business in America does in order to figure out their staffing, and we paid them not to do that. We didn't pay them to shoot from the hip, we paid them to do the calculation. We've been waiting 6 months for that answer. We need that answer.
They have just, I believe it was just this week, which I got from the First Selectman's office, a revised matrix report, in which it does have some significant revisions. I read it as it pertains to my department. I did not read it as it pertained to the fire department. I'd be
Well,
happy to forward that
distribution
report
to
to you
this body?
tomorrow.
Yeah, hang on. Number one, we'd like to get a copy of the report as well. But number two, it still stands that they made a very specific recommendation within their report that was delivered several months ago. And I would hope that specific recommendation was based on some type of calculation that, to earlier point made, it should be able to be an email to here was the calculation that we did to reach our conclusion. Otherwise, it's vapor. And if it's vapor, then we shouldn't be paying for vapor, because I can make statements like that without doing the calculation myself. And we don't need to pay people to do that. So I think what we'd like to see is the original calculation was done. And this isn't at you, Mr. Hiller, this is at the Matrix, but they made a recommendation. I'm hoping that that recommendation can be backed up by some type of facts and some type of calculation.
And that was a recommendation we paid for.
Exactly.
We haven't paid it all yet.
Well, I'd hold the check.
The check is on hold.
Yeah. Mr. Bolito.
On that specific point, when they were in front of us, and that question was asked very specifically, I remember very vividly them saying that, well, you'd have to try it out to see how it would work, something along those lines. So I suspect that what we're going to get back is, well, it's just, we don't have any facts to back that up in terms of their original report,
But it's just,
which is not right, but that's what I'm suspecting
but
was
it's
the
just
case
a
then.
I think in practice, you would have to see if it could work. But I think the actual calculation to say, this is why we believe it would work.
Yeah, absolutely. We need
You know,
that.
it's just a formulaic, it's not a, you know, if you don't manage it well, it's not going to work, right? If you manage it well, it still might not work. But the formulaic calculation to say this is what we based our recommendation on,
We're lacking that.
we're lacking that, and that should be something that
And that,
should be.
and that they based our cost, part of their cost savings recommendation on.
Exactly.
So, Mr. DeWitt, thank you again for bringing that up.
But I also want to go back to what Mr. DeWitt said during his commentary. I have to concur with him. You have to manage your manpower. And you manage your manpower, the whole idea that you can sit here in April and say, hey, you got to give somebody 10 or 20 vacation days between April and June so they don't lose it. That's a management issue, because I know a lot of union shops that say at the beginning of the year, and I don't work in a union shop, and even at the beginning of our year, because we have schedules and timelines of things we need to get out, they lay out very specifically, in July, pick your vacation time for the rest of the year, right? In January, they put up a calendar and say, pick your vacation time in January, and it's either, you either do or you don't, but they do the vacation time in January for the entire year, period. I don't know whether they do that here or not,
I don't know.
but to your point, Mr. DeWitt, if you do that and you're still incurring these overtime charges, it's a bigger issue.
Well, that's where I could start saying, I need 2 more minutes.
Exactly
And
right.
you know what? And you would think the fire department would want to do that, because at the end, if they managed their people well, at the end of the year said, oh, man, I tried my best, I had everybody coordinated, and I was still 4 guys short. That's great proof to come to us and say, need 4 more people, or 1 more person, or whatever.
Right.
But when you just say, well, last 2 months, I got a lot of guys off, and we gotta back them up with time and a half, wow. That's
Well,
not a good
goes to-
story.
You make a very excellent point about the seasonality of it, and I don't know the answer of it.
Right.
To what you point, but he's right. I think we got to look into it.
And do we have that same seasonality problem with the police force? Doesn't seem so, right?
Not to the degree. And of course, realize
Yeah,
this in the
we
police
don't
force.
have
You don't-
minimum
you don't
man.
have, you don't have the minimum manpower clause, is one of the problems.
So going back to
Yeah,
it,
I
and
guess-
you didn't answer the original question, which is, you're over budget by $148,000 now,
Correct.
and this little document says you're going to be $150,000 over at year end.
I think we're going to be more. Personally, that's my own personal opinion.
Right. How much do you think?
All net. I think we could go 250. I've said, Mrs. Gardner sat there in meetings in the first selectman's office back, and I was willing to, I made an offer of a wager that said, I'll say 250, and I haven't had any takers yet.
And these were all the accounts we raised last year, so that we wouldn't. go
You
over.
raised by 125,000. From the first selectman's recommendation, in total.
In total, we raised $125,000 in overtime accounts.
Well, Mr. Chair, we didn't raise them so much as we brought them back to what the department requests were.
That's correct.
And they had told us that 94% of these numbers were contractually obligated to pay. Theoretically, if that's a straight calculation, they shouldn't be able to overrun on those without a more detailed explanation back to this board, which I don't think we've received yet.
Right. I don't know how you overrun by this amount of money.
With an increase.
With an increase, because it's basically saying that you're running over what the first selectman recommended by $375,000.
Correct.
And absolutely, we said, we raised it by $125,000 to the originally requested, which we were told was, to Mr. Tetro's point, 90 to 95% contractual. So that means in the 5% that's not contractual, we were over by $250,000, $250,000 on the 5% that was non-contractual.
250, Mr. Hiller's number?
If we go with Mr. Hiller's number, if he says that's a
250 plus
As I say,
125.
that was a
Oh.
number,
If you think of it that way.
No, because they said if we go to if we give them the 125,
Oh, fair enough.
we
fair
made
enough.
them whole
Fair enough, right.
to 95%, right? So then they have 250 of that 5% that wasn't contractual. That's,
Fair.
yeah. I mean, if your number's right, Mr. Hill.
well, that was, Mrs. Gardner is my witness. I made an offer of a nominal wager that said, you know, that on June 30th, that it would be 250 over, and,
Can I still get in on that?
huh? You want a piece of the action?
I think that's a winner.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is there any way we can get an explanation with the math behind that in terms of where that's over, and so we can see that to help manage that as we go through the year next year?
Yeah.
What we could do, and I haven't had a chance to talk to the chair on this, is perhaps, because here we are, essentially 10 months through the fiscal year, and we're looking back on 9 months, is bring the chief, deputy chief in here at the June meeting, which doesn't look overly heavy, and just say, where are we, and, you know, what are we doing right now? And I think also to have an opportunity to look back at the matrix report. Mr. Bremer has done some work as far as that's concerned.
Right.
And,
Well-
and
I think that's a great idea. I would like to get that on the June calendar if we can. And what troubles me at this is, we're not just looking at overtime here, we're looking at payroll and overtime. So if it's the whole thing about being down a few guys and things like that,
they were down.
that
if you-
should be the
yeah.
offset in the payroll account, right?
Now, they have recently hired, but they're in academy, and so, you know, being able to put these people on the front line right now is not an option. But there was a lag as far as the, you know, getting those people into the department. You know, at one point, we were down 8 positions, I believe.
Yeah. I'm sure that's
Which is
part of it.
why also you'll see, though, that what happens, the amount for vacancy here, or the overage in the regular payroll line, which is only 114,000 now, was a much greater number. So you're netting that out.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? All right. Let's go to police payroll and overtime. Hey, we're below budget here.
And they expect to end the year 185,000 better than budget.
And the police chief from the fire department?
Again, there have been recent hires here, and I think the narrative here gives some explanation as to where we stand as far as bringing these new patrol officers on duty, on full duty.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I'm happy to see that street lights are substantially on budget.
Thanks to daylight savings.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hydrant and water. It's fine. Gas is under budget.
Under, what's electric?
Heating oil is under.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Tetra.
Can someone step us through what happens when the WPCA is over budget, since they're essentially self-funded? Do they have their own reserves and surplus?
They have a fairly significant reserve that would, if they overexpended, it would go against that reserve.
What happened with the fuel cell?
It's not working.
We had one fuel cell that was warranted, guaranteed for 5 years, and it failed one day after the 5-year guarantee expired. I kid you not. They're trying to go back and see if the company will
Maybe
at
Mr.
least
DeWitt has some
partially
influence at
make
United
good on it,
Technologies.
but that's in,
Is that the one on Ron Ron Highway as you're across from the,
Yeah.
yeah, that's.
however, in the meanwhile, while they're trying to
Yeah, it is UTC.
get that
Power
straightened out, we have to obviously purchase electricity because we cannot generate our own.
Do we have a number for what we expect to end the year at? How much over at the end of the year?
Let me get back to you on that because I think Rich White expected
How
to
much,
net out some of,
and how much did we pay for the fuel cell?
Fuel cell was basically I'd have to go back to an old memo of about, I say old, about 3 months ago when we became aware of it, that it was not operational, and that the warranty issues were not being resolved. Most of it was grant money. Most of it was grant money. We got it in.
So we didn't bond it?
No.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if this is a 3-month number, does that mean our run rate is about 40 grand a month over?
Yeah.
How long is it going to take to get a new fuel cell online?
That I don't know. I'd have to ask Mr. White on that. I think there's some offsets on it.
And, Mr. Chair, did you ask the total cost of a fuel cell?
I did. They don't have it yet, and they said it was grants.
Okay, and that total cost is going to be covered by the reserve amount by the WPCA? We're sure we have enough money for
Yeah,
that?
I don't have any overall financial problem, because they have a fairly hefty reserve.
Does that mean like $250,000 or $200 million?
Couple hundred.
Well, the issue is if it's $250,000 and you're burning through 40 grand a month.
That's why,
No,
yes.
it's more than that.
Well, plus depending on what the fuel cell actually costs.
Well, exactly.
That's what he said. So what does the fuel cell cost?
Do you guys know if we're looking to buy the fuel cell now?
Ended last year with an unencumbered balance of $2,091,000.
But let's ask the question, do they, just because I want to know, do you know what the game plan is for the fuel cell right now? Because it sounds like they're burning $40,000 a month.
I don't know. I don't know what, I know there's been discussion with the council. Ms. Cannelli has been involved in that.
That might be worth an update on our next meeting.
The other thing is, we just approved the budget for them, and I don't recall that being in there, which would mean that their budget is lower than they need to be for electricity expenditures
This is,
if they don't intend to buy the fuel cell, right?
if this is
When
April,
the budget was discussed, though, I mean, when we discussed this budget, which I don't have the exact date, but let's say at some point in mid-March, the fuel cell had failed well in advance of that date.
Right,
so nobody told us about that at the time of the budget.
right. Unless I go back to the budget book and the electric expense is much higher. I guess we need to understand what the plan is for the fuel cell. Because I'm concerned they have a budget issue for next year, and not knowing how much a fuel cell costs, if you're going to burn through $40,000 a month until you get a new one, that sounds pretty expensive. Right?
It's $480,000.
Actually, it looks like utilities, electric was up 73% in the budget
How
book.
much is that in pure dollars?
$637,000, I think we made, there was an adjustment to that. In my book, it was handwritten, but
Yeah, so are they going to replace the fuel cell or not? That's what I wanted to do.
We'll
Thank you,
find
Mr.
out.
Tetra.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. In order to do that, it better be a very expensive fuel cell, right? All right. Questions, comments on that item from anyone? All right. I'm just going down here, and if anybody wants to go back, please just yell. Public Works, overtime snow removal. You did say we're going to get about $135,000
It's
back.
anticipated.
Yeah, against this 558, right? Okay. Does anyone have any questions on that? I just have a comment on that, actually. I got an email from Fairfield National Little League on this, that one of the things that I guess Parks and Recs worked out with DPW was that they would suspend work on weekends on town fields in order to save funds to help offset that. Is that, the email didn't say that. The email blamed it on a budget cut. But I think on further review, it's because they're trying to save those funds within the DPW budget to help offset this? Do you have any knowledge of that, Mr. Hiller? I guess the question is, what are they doing to try to offset this, I
Yeah,
guess?
they, obviously, and Mr. White and Mr. Bartlett have said consistently since basically February 1st, when essentially it didn't have any major events
Yeah.
after roughly February 1st, that they were confident that they would be able to offset this. My concern was that at what other expense, which is, I think, what you're,
That's what we
what you're
talked
saying.
about, yeah.
that, were you going to scrimp and save to do something here? Or frankly, was it appropriate to come before this board, which has been done, and I researched this, it was done twice, I believe, when we looked at it, in 1984 and in 1993, when there were requests because of going significantly over budget, to come before this board for transfer funds from the contingency account.
Yeah.
They've said they didn't need that. I think they've had discussions with the first selectman on that. That option still remains even at this hour. Obviously, that is why the contingency account is there, and that's a decision, that's an administrative decision.
Can we, for a follow-up, and this doesn't need to be for next Tuesday night, but with a budget overage this large, then I commend the department for trying to manage it within their department and making decisions to cut back in expenses. I was caught flat by some citizens who contacted me about it, because this board, at least myself, let me speak for myself, I have seen no official communication that that's how they're doing it,
Yeah.
on cutting back on other services, and so I was left unaware when contacted that certain decisions, and I'm not saying the decisions are wrong, don't get me the wrong,
Yeah, I think-
don't read into it. I'm just saying, I had no answer for the
I
citizens.
think
who
one of the
called.
things that you should be aware of, and probably a question maybe that you're going to ask at the end of this item, as you did on revenue, where are we as far as that's concerned? I think the really good news is that, as you're aware, we had a significant contingency fund, which we brought forward. There essentially there have been a few items, and there was one passed by the RTM Monday night as far as that, which is the McKinley School study. Dr. Title has indicated, maybe Mrs. McQueen can address it better, that the need for the $328,000 for the Board of Education, which this board moved into the contingency account, is not there. Clearly, I think there will be a request at the June meeting for a transfer of funds for the, to properly fund the THEA contract, which was approved by the RTM on this past Monday evening. There's also the two items that we passed back in the winter on the Ludlow windows and on the Ward roof, which were taken out of that. And that's a June decision for this board as to how we handle it. I don't think you're going to see a request on either of those during this fiscal year.
Right.
And from a tax standpoint, or a surplus standpoint, you do. But the fact remains is there are significant dollars remaining in the contingency fund to, I don't say to just expend, but we can cite two instances, not in ancient history, but certainly a ways back, and we haven't had a winter like this past one in anyone's history. And in two times, both, and I don't hold me exactly, but 1984 and 1993, there were requests made by the Department of Public Works for supplemental funds as a result of excessive snow removal costs.
Is somebody, okay, we'll go to Mr. Tetra. I don't know if there's any other questions, comments. Go ahead.
Kind of two comments within this. One, following on a point I believe you brought up last time around, Mr. Chair, that given there was this much snow removal, is that going to cause extra road maintenance and paving as part of this? And have we comprehended that somewhere? And the other thing I was expecting to see in this, or maybe we should take that one first, and I'll come back to that.
Do you know what they're doing within the department to?
I have had conversations primarily with Mr. Bartlett on that. They were, you know, I think they're out there full bore right now. Obviously, the wetness hasn't helped them as far as that's concerned. But they are moving ahead with,
Just the numbers, Paul.
the numbers I don't know as far
Are
as the
they,
numbers.
are they planning to spend more in road maintenance because of the winter in the remaining months of the year?
Well, they, you know, and again, I think that they're trying to manage their budget within the constraint that they have, that they've got.
And to that point, and then, instead of going anecdotally, let me see if I can ask the question. And this doesn't need to be for Tuesday, but would be very helpful to us, would be to, obviously, someone within Department of Public Works sat down and said, we need to find $500,000 within our budget to fix this overage. Here's how we're going to do it. We're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do this. We're going to save this by doing this. And, oh, by the way, we probably need to spend more money on road maintenance. So instead of saving $500,000 or whatever it is, we need to save $700,000 because we needed to. I'd like to have a better understanding of what's not getting done and what is getting done. And again, I applaud them for trying to do it within their own budget. I'm not
One of the
asking to
things, and
spend
this is
more
an
money.
accounting issue, which we've just encountered this week, because in the Munis system, they can't put purchase orders into accounts in which they're over, and they've run up against that wall this week in a couple of major accounts.
But they're making some type of trade-off decisions, which is great. I think to your point, you want to know what they are.
And one more follow-up on that.
Yeah, please.
The other thing that I expected to hear tonight, because we talked about it when we were discussing the CIP projects,
Yep.
was the oil tank removal and spill cleanup from last summer
Yes.
that was apparently not correctly accounted for or booked at that time. I was looking for where that was going to be booked this time. How much money? Where was it booked? Because that, I believe, is also hitting the DPW accounts, which,
I'd have to go back and check that, but roughly half of that was booked during the prior fiscal year 10, and the remainder was moved into these accounts.
okay, how could it have been booked in fiscal year 10 when it was coming out of the CIP account, at least initially, we were told that's where it was
It
booked?
was, that's where it was originally, it was portions of it, not the entire amount. That removal cost in the neighborhood of $85,000. And there was roughly half of that funds were expensed into the operating account of the prior year. The other half,
Mr. Chair, if
roughly
I
half.
might, just to clear that up, if somebody could give us an accurate presentation of what the costs were, what accounts were used, because I don't remember making any adjustments for that last year, and that wasn't the explanation, at least I remember just a month ago.
Mr. Hill, why don't you, we didn't make any adjustments to 2010.
I'm sorry.
We didn't find out about it till March.
Right, we didn't find out about it until the 2010 audit report.
We can
was
give that
finished.
report Tuesday night.
All right, so we know.
Thank you.
And again, on the DPW side, I applaud them for doing it within their budget. I just think with a $500,000
cost
hole, at
elsewhere?
what cost? And it might be more than $500,000 because to the point that I did bring up during the budget process, the road maintenance that they're gonna have on it. Because of the tough winter. So, any other questions? Okay. Library part-time payroll, anything? Okay. And library materials, 80K under budget. Mr. DeWitt?
This one I don't understand. If you look at your sheet, page 24. Now, three-quarters way down the page, there's a line item, 56180, library materials, $622,510. It appears as if we took all that money and allocated it across a bunch of new line items, 40100, 401.
Those are projects.
Okay,
Those are projects that sum up to the object 56,180.
Got it. Right,
So-
I got it. So that's like a break, so that should be, if you total all those up, they should equal $622,510.
Between the two branches.
Right. So when you do that, and I'm just going to look at the transfer line, just the transfer column, so I'm sorry, just follow me here.
Okay.
At the end of the total library, we're still $133,000 to the good. So of the $622,000, there's still $133,000 left.
No, you have to look at the branch, which is also
I'm
187.
getting there.
Oh, okay.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Then you go to the branch, which had $0 allocated, and it spent 187. There was a transfer. I want to make sure I'm clear. There was a transfer of $187,000. So, quick math says they're $56,500 over budget, just in the transfers. But then, you look at what they've actually expended, and you look at the bottom of page 14, they transferred in $451 and they spent $16,000. So if I had a better calculator than this thing, I probably could have figured out that they're way over. I mean, like, it's got to be almost $100,000, $80,000, call it. So I'm just going by the transfer line, but the transfer total to the expended line is, look at it, 129%, 6,130%. They're crazy over budget. So unless I'm missing something, I don't know where they're 80 grand over budget. I think maybe that should have been over budget. Because I don't get it.
You're
And-
starting your transfers
Yep,
with the object 56,180.
got it. 622,510.
You got it,
Then you buy a bunch of stuff, and at the end
You
of
start-
total library,
right, you allocate it among the project
right,
codes.
there's still $133,000 left in total library. Then you go to the branch, and you spend $187,000. So you had 133, you spent 187, that's $54,000
You-
over budget. That's
did-
just on transfers.
Right, that's transfers, that's not what was spent.
Then you go to expenditures, and you see that most of the lines, I mean, not all of them, but some of them, most of the lines are 100% expended, or at least, you know. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes and no, because really what you spent in the branch was 106, not 187. And
106.
And what happens is, even though we have projects assigned, because some of the materials are online books and that type of things
Right.
versus magazines, and I know that Karen Ronald tries to keep them separate. I'm not, so, you know, we don't really go by project, we just go by the total number.
No, I'm-
They're under by 80,000 though.
Right,
because
but,
they-
okay, but just by taking $622,000 and allocating it, they're $50,000 over their allocation. I mean, just look at that transfer line. 133 under, 187 over, 54,000. Forget expended. They've allocated $50,000 more than they had, right?
Well, that's probably because they had POs outstanding from a prior year that are,
There's no transfer in, it's all transfer.
That's what the Munis system does. It takes
That's what
what
it
the
does.
existing
Yeah.
purchase orders, which were approved by this board back in September,
right,
Yeah.
and moves that all into these lines.
right. So those
But
schedules
isn't
that
there
you
an
approve.
equivalent transfer that goes along with that?
There's an encumbrance that was created
Right,
for purchase orders that were outstanding as of July 1st, and that they all move in here. And so really what you're seeing is that, and that's where, and I had difficulty, you know, in the new system personally, you know, saying, and I see your point. But you've got to go back and look at what was that encumbrance as of July 1st that got moved in there, that added into that revenue, added into.
I guess I don't understand, if we carried a $50,000 P over from the year before this, that we would have taken that $50,000 and transferred it into this budget to cover the PO. I mean, we always go through this with Twig, right? Make sure you transfer enough money to cover all my POs. I guess I don't understand why we wouldn't have taken 50,000 and put it in here to cover the 50, so it would reconcile out for this year.
Mr. DeWitt, can Mr. Kiley follow up on your?
Oh, I'm
report?
sorry. Yes,
No,
sure.
no, no,
Mr.
please.
Kiley, please.
Yeah, I think I think I'm following Chris's, I can't do the math, but I think I'm following what he's saying. And if I'm hearing Mr. Hiller and Mrs. Gardner correctly, the simple answer on this report would be for a separate column to show prior year transfers or carryovers, so therefore your current year internal transfers would wash out, and you would clearly see.
That's
I mean,
correct. The
that's,
problem is-
I
You're
mean, that's a
right.
very simple concept.
Yeah.
That's a very simple concept, but I think you'll have difficulty getting it out of Munis.
It's one of the, it's one of the.
Even just adding a transfer line, adjustment line?
If I'm hearing the
Something that we used
conversation,
to
right?
see before, because you could see those, you could see that, what you don't see here is, you can't identify. I mean, I'd have to go back to a September agenda and say, okay, we moved 56,000, whatever the number was, so there were
I get
purchase
it.
orders existing
Right.
as of July 1st into this budget, and so you bumped it up by that amount.
I get that, but it's a very simple, you add a column to the report and you pull the data from a different table, and, I mean, it's a
Reconcile it.
crystal report is my guess, or I don't know what kind of report it is, but what can be that difficult about doing that?
Yeah, that could be the.
I mean, it's $1 million system if you can't, I mean, I could do that at my company, so they should be able to figure this out.
Mr. DeWitt, do you have a follow-up?
No, I think we're,
Mr. Kiley?
No.
I think we've raised an issue, but
Yeah, I
I
think
just
we
didn't
need a
see,
follow-up on the
it
item.
seems as if
Yeah.
it's a bigger issue.
Let's go to Mr. Bolito.
Wasn't there an issue, you were talking about the Munis and how it's accounting for all this with the library specifically. Didn't the library effectively get cut off because it was showing that they'd already spent their allocation for the year, and we were supposed to get some sort of report on that?
It wasn't a cut, no, they're having problems with the purchasing area, and some of the requirements is what has to go out to bid and things like that.
That was,
by the
that was,
system.
All right,
that
so
was
that's a
the
policy thing rather than an
dialogue.
accounting thing.
That's
And
a
that's-
to-be
that- and thank
continued
you, Mr.
area with
Bolito, yeah.
purchasing, because the Board of Education and the library had similar issues.
That's going to
there.
come back to us in either a June meeting or a July meeting.
Okay.
I don't remember which meeting it's on the agenda for, but we pushed it, but thank you for bringing that back up. Mr. Tetro?
Just perhaps just a format question. I'm looking at the first page of the packet that we're given. Where do I find what accounting period this covers?
It doesn't. It is the date in which it was printed, which is the upper left corner. And what it doesn't do is doesn't designate that it's, from,
What it does.
Is there some way
what
to
it does-
get the accounting period
What
covered?
it does, Mike, is you have to read it in their code, and it says for 2/11, which means the year.
Nine months.
09,
Well,
which means the
tell-
ninth
tell me-
month.
Tell me where you're reading that code, please.
right below where it says El Gardine, you'll see
Are you looking
for
at the-
2/11/09. That means for fiscal year 11.
Through the
Ninth
ninth,
month.
through the
Ninth
ninth period, which is the
Gotcha.
third quarter.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you'll either see it 3, 6, 9, or
We ran it for April, it would say 10, obviously.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on this item? All right, seeing none, that's the last item called on expenses. Are there any other questions, comments on expenses? No, it was good. Mr. Hiller, then the question will stand on the expense side. How are we going to come in the year?
Well, as I said, I think the two, the good news is, as I mentioned before, is on the contingency fund. And with the information that Dr. Title has at least verbally presented, not requiring any of those funds at this time. There are numerous, savings in a lot of departments that have been affected, in many cases, primarily as a result of vacancies, that for the most part have been filled by this time.
I'm looking for a number.
Shut off the cameras, Jerry.
What, are we going to have 30 seconds of missing tape here, Mr. Hiller?
I think that we're going to be, and net, I think we're going to end the year revenues, expenses in the $1.5 million range, positive.
So if that means $1 million on revenue and then $500,000 down on expenses, somewhere in that area, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's difficult enough to give that number. One of the problems with our financing schedule, we have to give that number to the rating agencies in early July, and it's, we're 70 days out from that point.
Right.
But I think, and as I say, I think the major caveat is on the tax collection issue, which looks healthy. I think the fee incomes look good, with the possible exception that we may run short on the golf because of weather. Interest income certainly is going to be negatively impacted. And on the expense side, we've got a problem with fire, which is offset by police.
Thank you for the update. This is probably the most detailed we've gone through in quite a long time, and that's probably, since we're three-quarters of the way
I think I
through the
would,
year.
and maybe, I distributed to you this evening, just as a comment, an agenda for Tuesday night.
Yeah.
I think this board deserves an answer on two things for Tuesday night.
Well, let me, before you go there, let me go through my follow-up items, because I made notes of it, and I want to make sure we're in the same place. So forgive me, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I do want to thank you guys. Mrs. Gardner, I want to thank you for your effort. This gets better each time we go through it, and so I appreciate that, and I know we all do. I think the follow-up items we have are on the current year levy, Mr. Hiller. Would like to get an update, particularly on the delinquent accounts, as well as kind of what the status is, some notes as to what the status is on, this one has been contacted by letter, this one's been called, this is what we know. I think at this point, given that's approaching $1 million and it's got an area of concern that you put on it, that's
Correct.
probably worthwhile, and I appreciate you raising it. I think we need some follow-up on the interest on investments to make sure that we understand the accounting and we're comfortable there. Continues to remain an area of concern, and also a follow-up to Mr. Kiley's wishes for a contra revenue account in the general ledger for the expenses related to the investment income. The first item I have for next week, and I might have that wrong, there might be another item, but the first one I have that we want for Tuesday, and I think we need it for Monday for the RTM, is a follow-up on the town dump scale and the whole, the flow-through of the new regulations on the recycling. I can't remember, you had a neat term for it, but I can't.
Single stream.
Single stream. I think everybody needs to understand that, and what the impact on that budget is, and I think that's one that needs to be done for next Tuesday. On the fire payroll and overtime expenditures, I do think it would be appropriate to have the fire department, the fire chief, and the assistant chief come on in towards the end of the year. I think you recommended June to discuss the overtime issue. And I think we need to get a better understanding of it, because this board did go to great lengths to follow their specific recommendation to fund their overtime account. And we have had a couple of discussions with them this year about them being over, and we do understand there were things related to the Bridgeport incidents earlier in the year, things of that sort. So there are some extenuating circumstances. The fact of the matter is, it is $250,000 over, by your own estimates. WPCA Electric, I think we want to follow up on the fuel cell, what the status of that is, as well as we want to make sure they're covered in their budget for next year. I think on the Public Works, the overtime snow removal, we want to know how they're offsetting that and what essentially they're giving up within their own department. I think we applaud them for trying to do it within their department. I'm not looking for them to come back and ask for more funds, but it'd be interesting to know what's not getting done and what areas they're cutting out. And then I think Mr. DeWitt comments on the library materials and what's going on there, and how that's accounted for. I think that's very worthwhile. I think I might be missing one follow-up point for next Tuesday night. The oil tanks, is that what it was?
The oil tank and the spill and how that was accounted for.
Thank you,
We
Ms.
thought it was in CIP money, now it turns out it was part last year, part this year, and we were asking for a clarification.
And in part, I think that's going to be, a portion of that's going to be relating to the expenses within the Public Works Department for this year and for the prior year.
Okay. And I think the second follow-up item for Tuesday night was the current year tax levy, and you thought you could give us an update on that.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Right. Was there anything else, everybody, that I'm missing? It's quite possible I'm missing something. Jim, do you? Hey, Jim, do you have anything that I'm missing? Okay. So that's it on the town side.
Oh, this fuel cell, were we going to get an update?
Yeah,
I've
he
got
mentioned that. Well, I think the people that you want to have here Tuesday night are basically the Public Works team plus Mr. Zimbruski. You want Mr. White, Mr. Bowman.
But I think we need
Zabriskie
dollars,
and Mr.
right?
Bartlett.
I don't think it can be anecdotal. I think we actually need dollars. I think we need
Yeah.
the analysis that has the dollars.
So like with the oil tank, it's like, here's how much it cost, 85 grand.
Yeah.
Here are the accounts it went into in fiscal '10, here's the accounts it went into in fiscal '11, totaling whatever that, 85 grand. Right. Mr. Chair, were we also going to look at the process by which we are sure that we won't have that interest income accrual reversal situation?
Yeah, and I'd mentioned that on here. I'd called it, thank you, I'd called it the accounting related to the interest on an investment
sorry.
account. Yeah, no, thank you. All right, with that, I want to take a 5-minute recess, let everybody reset, and we'll come back and look at the Board of Education if we don't mind. Thank you. All right, guys, we're going to bring it back to the table. And for the last time.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
have copies if anyone wants of the
I
reports.
just passed them out.
Mrs. McQuaid passed them out.
Yeah, it was,
I made
it was
copies.
emailed to you on Monday, inadvertently omitted from your packet when you got it, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't know it had gone out without it until I got in on Monday.
And I know, as well, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we all personally heard of your loss of your dad in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you.
And we're very sorry for your loss. Our hearts go out to you and your mom and your brother
Thank you.
and members of your family for that. And so know that you were in our thoughts and prayers when we heard about it.
Thank you very much. He was a great guy.
Yeah. So, all right, so let's move forward with the quarterly statement. If you just want to walk us down it.
Sure, actually, what I'd like to do is just kind of take you through the new format, because this
That'd
is
be great.
something new that we're doing. The copy that you have reflects what the Board of Education reviewed at their April meeting, and they are going to be getting an update to that with a request for some transfers to be made at their May 10th meeting. It says May 24th, but I'm going to do that meeting, and I'll do it on the 10th. I'll come back for my final swan song with them. But what this is a new format, although not necessarily a new format, but it's something that we are now doing for the board, that divides our budget into major classifications, which follows the guidelines that we have for a transfer approval with the Board of Education. So there are really 7 major classifications, as you can see on the second page. The summary of them is right there. I'll just briefly go through with you what's in each of the classifications. The detail behind it, the next level of detail, comes on the backside of that page and the next page. So under personnel services are all salary-related accounts. It includes substitutes, degree changes, attrition, interns, all salary-related accounts. Fixed charges, of course, are all benefit accounts. Pupil personnel expenses is what we call special education expenses. It excludes contracted salaries because that's included under personnel services. We keep all of that together under one umbrella. But it excludes the gifted and the capital outlay accounts. But it's all other special education accounts. And the detail you see by the object codes on the second and the final page. School expenses are all school budgeted accounts, but it does not include substitutes. Again, those are included under personnel services. It includes our centrally funded accounts, including supply, text, and material accounts, sports accounts, activity accounts, conference and staff development, copying, hourly tutoring, and gifted accounts are all included under the school umbrella. Those are the accounts that they have control over, that they have to manage with their school allocation, that they have to make transfers within their own accounts in order to cover any shortfalls or changes in spending from the time they develop the budget till the end of the year. The next area are support expenses, and those are our instructional expenses. They include program implementation, early literacy, centrally funded instructional programs, non-special ed tuition, and central support business accounts are all part of the support expenses. The sixth category is maintenance, operation, and transportation. These are all of our maintenance and operation accounts. They include utilities, transportation, with the exception of when the schools budget for their field trips out of their allocation. That, again, falls under school expenses. They have control over that money. Equipment repair and maintenance accounts and technology support accounts. And the final category is our capital account, and those are capital outlay accounts, including replacement and new purchase accounts. So what I did on the March 31st statement that was reviewed with the Board of Education was I just gave them, first of all, they saw this new process and reporting format early on in March, and then knew that they were going to get a quarterly statement March 31st that they would review with more detail to include the narrative that I included in your report. And then with the understanding that we would be coming back to them in May, requesting some transfers that they have the authority to approve for expenditures that are going to be either under or over in our operating budget. I can go through this with you. You can read it yourself. I'm sure you don't want me to read it to you. But if you do have any questions, I will say to you that we're in the process this week of preparing the statement for the board. There are going to be a couple of areas that have already been discussed in the narrative on this statement. One of them is special education. We've been talking about that since the early fall. We have been working very diligently and trying to get that number down to a reasonable number. So there are really only two areas that we're looking at, and it's maintenance. Some of that is in maintenance overtime and maintenance and custodial overtime. A lot of it is in just projects that we have had to assume the responsibilities for that came up that were not budgeted projects, and for which Tom Cullen has had quite a laundry list of things that we have had to cover out of our operating budget that will require transfers from other areas. So those are the two real areas that we have shortfalls. Utilities are looking fairly good right now. We're in the process of finalizing heating fuel to see how close we're going to be there. Our shortfall in the overall utility accounts, after using all of them to balance each other, is really negligible, which is a good thing. And we have also identified all of the areas where we're going to find funding or have funding available, and most of them are alluded to in the narrative on the statement. And we'll be asking the board for specific transfers to come to help cover that. I'm anticipating that right now, always subject to change, but right now, that we are somewhere just shy of $600,000 that we are going to have to transfer within other accounts in order to accommodate special education and maintenance.
Okay.
That statement will be, as I said, will be out on May 10th for the Board of Ed, at which time it will be forwarded to you also.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand up? I'm sorry, Ms.
So, thank you, Mr. McClintock. So at this level, this is a great overview, thank you very much. This is, on your second line, special appropriations and transfers. So this is the level you're moving around big chunks of money, just at these seven
The seven areas, yes.
Right.
Within the areas, within each of these levels or major classifications.
Right.
We can move money around, and do, on a
Right.
regular basis.
No, and I can see that here. So that special appropriation transfer line is always going to be zero because you got to
Correct.
reconcile out that
Everything
number.
reconciles on a monthly basis, right.
So I see that so personnel services, I guess I mean, it's $112,000 of a $95 million budget, but, I would think that's probably I would think that would be like your most stable of the 7 because it's contractual, you're contractually obligated, those numbers are kind of a foregone
It is
conclusion.
contractual, however, there is attrition money in there, too, that we make up. And that's part of what we will be using to cover other areas in our budget. There's not a lot of it this year.
Okay.
Because we
Well, I
build,
see you
remember, we...
transferred money into it this year, actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. And remember, we built in a $350,000 deficit that we have to cover
Right.
in attrition, because we make the assumption, year over year, that we are able to recoup changes in staffing that will help offset that negative number. But we
Right.
just about made it this year. We have done other things with our staffing in order to help the special education department. Looked very carefully at positions and when we were going to fill positions, that sort of thing, within special education.
Right. It does seem, though, the amount of your transfers are very small in comparison to your total budget, so obviously
Correct.
this was,
But
this was allocated initially very well.
And there will be some more, because the board will then be approving ones that have to go within major classifications that we can't do ourselves, or that we just inform the board, so they have a good picture of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Great, thank you.
Okay?
Anybody else? Mr. Brown, then I'll go over to Mr. Tetra.
Thank you. Staying with personnel services, how do I read that staff replacement where it starts off at minus 862 and then 1.5 million goes in? How?
I'm sorry, could you just say that again,
Sure.
Jim? I couldn't hear you.
On personnel services, just staying in that?
Yep.
And if we go down to 133, staff replacement? Mm-hmm. What's happening there?
That is the attrition line, and that's the staffing that we balance all of our salary accounts, all of our several hundred salary accounts on a monthly basis. So if we have somebody that, for example, has left on a leave of absence, we don't leave the salary money that's remaining for that person for the rest of the year in the salary account. You'll see all the unencumbered balances of zero or pennies or whatever it happens to be on all of our staffing accounts. We move the money into that staff replacement account as a placeholder. That's the ins and the outs of all of our staffing funding.
Okay. Okay. And this,
It allows us to balance every salary account at the end of every month to make sure that there are no problems with any payrolls.
okay. Just a question on the special education. How much are we below or what are we, we're over budget?
Yeah, we're over budget.
And does that include the ARRA money, right? We have
Yes.
that. So that includes that $2 million.
That's already taken out of the mix, right. That's already been expended beyond all of the other funding that we have available for special education, beyond excess cost adjustments that we're projecting through the end of the year. Remember, we don't even have a final total on excess cost yet. We're not going to know that until sometime mid-May as to what we're actually going to get. But that, beyond all of that, we're short about $365,000.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Tetra?
Just a couple of process questions. One, what did you prepare this report in? What, is this Munis or is this a separate
It's-
program?
It's Munis, well, everything is in Munis. It is our report that we wrote. It's not a Munis report.
Okay, just going to say, great format. And then second,
you.
in terms of your month-end processing, I'm impressed as all get out. If assuming the clock on here is right, you've had this report printed out with all month-end adjustments for the third quarter before the end of business.
We do.
Wow.
We try.
That's tremendous cycle time. Very impressed with that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Brockville.
Thanks. Echo the comments. It's a good report. Thank you. Silly question maybe, but if we go back to this this page here, the overview, there's an unencumbered balance of almost $7 million. Could you explain that to me?
There are many things that are not paid or encumbered up front. For example, all of our extracurricular salaries that we pay out on a scheduled basis. That's a payroll that hits at a particular date and time. The 7 million also would accommodate the fact that if you're looking at a March 31st statement, in some cases, you're looking at bills that have only hit that cover the beginning of February, have nothing to do with March, because of the timing in when we get bills through the system. So, for example, that 7 million is now down to just under 6 million at the end of April, as I looked at it today. So it's really a timing issue. There's a lot that goes through payroll that is not an encumbered payroll, substitutes, hourly tutors. When you remember, we're 67% of our budget is in salaries.
When you, I don't mean to, when
No,
you, yeah.
and the other piece of it would be, utility expenses, transportation expenses beyond our encumbered amount for our contract. Anything along those lines is not an
Variable
encumbered amount.
costs. Yeah, variable costs that you're going to have in the next
Right.
3 months.
Which aren't budgeted, which aren't,
Oh, no, they're budgeted.
They're budgeted, they're not encumbered,
They're
meaning
not
they
encumbered.
haven't actually agreed to pay them out yet. That's what the
oh,
encumbered
okay,
means.
okay.
Right.
So your expectation is that,
Sorry to
that it, no, that's okay, I appreciate it. So your expectation is that this number will be used up?
Close to zero
Okay.
by the end of the year.
Yeah, Mr. Bellino?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I echo the sentiments about the quality of the format. It's nice to see somebody actually followed one of the recommendations of the Budget Subcommittee, so I appreciate that. One thing I wanted to ask about was textbooks, because I want to make sure I'm reading this right. I see a couple of lines in the detail part about textbooks. Under pupil personnel expense, I see zero appropriation is adopted. I see an expenditure of $1,900 approximately. And then you go over to support expenses, and there's another line item for textbooks, $5,000. And there's a line up in school expenses which relates to supplies, books, and materials. Is that also textbooks as well, or is it something different?
It can be textbooks, it can also be other supply items or materials items for classrooms, not necessarily all textbooks.
Right.
There's an awful lot more than textbooks
Oh, I
that go
know,
on in those
believe me.
accounts right now.
Although my son's book bag keeps getting heavier and heavier, it seems. We're not spending a lot on textbooks. That's what strikes me, is that I would have thought that line would be greater. Is it just, is it in some other line item I'm not seeing, or what's the rationale behind that?
The textbook line item is really budgeted in two categories. It's budgeted in the instructional office for district-supported, for example, new textbooks that are going to be going into the classroom. They have to be approved by the Board of Education, for which we have bids out now for three or four of those. And it's also at the discretion of the schools. Most of the textbook, supply, and material accounts are all handled at the school site level. They budget that out of their allocation.
Okay.
So you're right, it's not as major a purchase, unless they're doing a lot of major textbook replacement in a specific discipline, like a new math
Right.
textbook.
So,
And a lot is done on the computers now. And a
yeah,
lot
I have
is done
noticed
with
that too.
other-
But it seems like, at least at the middle school level where my son is, it seems like there is still a lot of textbook material, and some assignments are on Edline and on through the computer, but not as much as you would think. But, so what you're saying is that the allocations really are done through the school accounts,
For the
where
most
the
part.
principal and the individual schools will get a certain amount, and they'll use that for replacement textbooks or things like that.
And in truth, once a textbook is purchased, it's not purchased again. It's for
Right.
quite a few years. So that's why you don't see a large amount in every year.
Right.
It just depends upon what they're focusing on
So
for
if
the
the
next
curriculum
year.
remains the same and the books are in relatively good condition, they just keep
We
going through
don't-
the system,
we
so
don't
that would
replace
explain
them.
the line item being a little bit lower.
Correct.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it.
Any other questions? From my perspective, a few thoughts. First of all, save the best for last. This is probably the best financial report I've seen in 6 years from the Board of Education, so thank you. I think it's very helpful. And my recommendation would be that when, as future boards look at this on a quarterly basis, that this would also be a nice addition to your annual budget, so that you're looking at the budget in the same format as you're used to seeing it quarterly.
Right.
I would also, since we're probably only going to be looking at this on a quarterly basis, ask that the explanation paragraphs that you've put in the front of it become kind of standard for the back of the, kind of the footnotes, so that...
They will be.
Yeah, because I'm never going to remember, exactly what the pupil personnel expenses are from 3 months to the next, so having that back there would be helpful, or whoever's here at the time. It'd also be great to be able to get the report prior to the meeting so that we could look at it
Sure.
and be able to respond to it. And is the intent with the report going forward, and we've gone through a similar process with Mrs. Gardner, to have somebody actually write kind of an explanation as to what's going on within each section? So
Correct.
that there's some kind of narrative, or what you'd call them, management discussion and analysis? Is that what the intent's going to be?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is what we have done in the past, and what we have done with the board, and how we have.
With the Board of Ed?
reported with the Board of Ed.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been using this type of a format. So we will be just translating that into this type of format and highlighting either the shortfalls or the plus balances that we have that
Yeah.
are going to help offset them.
That'd be great, to have that MD&A on the front, to have the same format report, and then to have the footnotes on the back.
Yep.
And have it prior to the meeting. That'd be, from my perspective, just very helpful.
Okay.
Very helpful. I think this is great, so
Well,
thank
as
you.
soon as the board reviews any of the reports, then they'll just be forwarded on to you for your review also.
Yeah, I think this is a huge step forward, so
Great.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have any, I just got we all just got it, so I've just gone through it on myself, but I'd like to take a little bit more time with it, to be honest with you. But does anybody have any questions on specific items as they sit here right now? No? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's, all right, that was item number 2. Boy, we're buzzing now. To review, item number 3 is to review the current status of the town pension funds at March 31st. Mr. Hiller, were we going to have some guests join us tonight from the pension board?
They were not available. I can give you, we have not received from our advisor the March 31st statements. This is the December 31st statements. I can give you an update from this. When you get this report, if you
Mr.
were to
Chair?
turn.
Yeah.
I move we postpone this item to a date certain, our June meeting, so that we can discuss this with the pension folks and plan and with the updated information.
Do I have a second to that? Okay. Any discussion on that? Is that what I got to do now?
The only discussion would be that, and I think Mike just implied it or said it, I think that while having Paul talk about it is valuable, he is on the board and he's very knowledgeable, I know because I've worked with him on it. I really think we need to have the chair of the pension board or boards to come and make a presentation.
The question, and you've been on the board, the question I would have on that, very frankly, is would it be more valuable to have Mr. Hyman from Evaluation Associates here as opposed to the chairman of the board? I mean,
If you're directing the question to me only because I was on the board
Yeah.
recently, I would say that both couldn't hurt. I would personally prefer to have the chairman of the pension board if I had a choice between the two. Mr. Hyman is going to discuss kind of detailed investment talk, which may or may not be of great interest to the board, whereas I think the overview is what people are kind of interested in. I think some of the questions that have been raised in terms of what the future hopes and dreams of the pension board or results might be. So if they both can come, that'll be wonderful. But
This-
at the very least, I think it should be the chairman of the board to.
chairman of the joint, you see, the first selectman actually
Is
serves
also a
as
joint,
chairman of one
chairman,
of
right.
the joint investment board.
Right,
because
right,
First selectman serves as chairman of the police and fire board under the
right.
charter.
But especially given the fact that we have some changes at the first selectman level coming up, we
Yeah.
probably
Well,
want the.
I think we're gonna-
interesting
I think
point on that is
let's-
that
I think
the
we're gonna
makeup of the board
request-
is going to not change
Mr. Hiller, for the-
dramatically because
Mr. Hiller?
Mrs. McQueen has,
Mr. Hiller?
yep,
For the June meeting?
yep.
Let's ask for the chairman of the board to be here, as well as the representative from the investment advisors, please.
Joint pension board.
Yeah, the chairman of the joint pension board, thank you. And I just have a question before we vote on this, because I think I know how this is going to go down. Did this quarterly meeting surprise some people? Did we not know the date?
Just unavailability and some health issues, too.
Some health issues there were, so we didn't, I just would have appreciated knowing that they couldn't be here before the meeting, to be honest.
Miss-
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that perhaps a calendar of our quarterly reviews get handed out to the chairman of the Joint Pension Board ahead of time so that perhaps those things can be planned for in advance.
Yeah, please, Mr. Hiller, let's make that happen. I just had no idea that they weren't going to be here tonight, and and I'm sorry for the health issues, but I think we're trying to follow up a request that I think the RTM made as part of their process of after the Madoff situation. They wanted to make sure there were more eyes other than just the pension board, and they asked that we play a role. I think they asked that for themselves to play a role, right?
Actually, just to clarify, Mr. Chair, that they put it in the ordinance, so I think that means it's the law.
Yeah.
It's in the charter.
Yeah, it's
No, it's not in the charter.
It's in the ordinance.
It's in the ordinance
It's in
Yeah.
the ordinance, okay.
that
Yep.
passed.
So, there you go. So I think we're trying to fulfill our obligation under the law of the great land we live in right now. And I'm a bit miffed that I didn't know they weren't going to be here until about 5 minutes ago. Okay. With that said, any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? All right, so we need to vote on postponing this item to a date certain, our June meeting, correct? With the request that the representative from the investment firm be here, as well as the chairman of the joint pension boards, if they can be here. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? There we go. Boy, we're just killing them now. Just knocking them off. All right. To review the projected debt schedules as a result of all authorizations through April 25th, 2011.
I have with me, and we had a great dialogue this afternoon between Mr. Leslie and Mr. Spurndle, who could not get his schedule through our system. I talked to Mr. Spurndle on his way back from Danbury today, and so I do not have that report. I have the old one.
Do we have a motion?
I will have it tomorrow on hard copy.
In hard copy? Okay.
Fast track this.
Why don't we just email it around?
Yeah. Kevin, why don't you make a motion, please?
I move to postpone item 4 to a date certain, that date being our June regular meeting.
Okay, do we have a second to that motion? Seconded by Mr. DeWitt this time. And we'll ask for a copy of the schedule to be forwarded around as soon as it is available, please. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries. Okay. We're rolling. All right.
for number 5 now.
Yeah. To review.
Better have all this data.
To review the town cash investment policy is item number 5. Mr. Hiller, you don't need to leave, do you?
Now, well, I think one of the issues here is there has not been specifically a town investment policy, with the exception of being guided, as I spoke earlier, by state statute. I pass out to you, and frankly, we are not, we're probably in the majority of communities that do not have such a thing, and I think in this day and age that it's time that we perhaps do this. I circulate to you an investment policy, which is the one which has been adopted by the town of Darien, just as a framework on this. There are certain things, I shared this earlier with Mr. Brackfeld. As he indicated, we've been in some dialogue over the past couple of months on this. I think that this, first off, obviously, it's in keeping with state statute. There are some constraints in here which I have some concerns on, but I think one of the aspects of this is, though the purpose obviously is first off safety, but also to achieve some income, that we would be wise to, at some point now, appoint a subcommittee to review this policy. We can accumulate some other policies that I can find out where they are or who has them. As I say, we're in the majority as far as not having one. but I think it's time that we have one.
I'm going to go to Mr. Brockfeld, because you've been intimately involved in this, and then I'll recognize Mr. Tetra. Mr. Brockfeld, what's your views on where we stand right now and what next steps need to be, because you've been intimately involved at our request? And then I'll go to Mr.
Yeah,
Tetra.
thank you. Well, first of all, I just repeat what I said before, that we have a lot of issues that we have differences on this board, and we had plenty of heat over this issue over the last 2 years or so, and I just want to thank Mr. Hiller and Mr. Flato, and you, Mr. Flynn, as well, because we got together, and slowly but surely, we've made some progress towards trying to fix this in a better fashion. I think, actually, Paul, you just stole is the wrong word, I said what I was going to actually present, which is I think that this is an area where a subcommittee of some sort, probably from this board, maybe in conjunction with some of the other boards, including the Board of Selectmen and the RTM, could get together and work with Paul in terms of getting together a investment policy. But it goes without saying that we need an investment policy, a stated investment policy. I don't think it's fair to Paul and his team. I don't think it's fair to whoever may eventually in the future replace him, that they don't have a more defined investment policy. The state guidelines are at the very same time strict and loose, and I think it makes it difficult for them to do the job personally. So.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure if we need to actually spend that much time tonight on it. I don't think we have that much to actually report, really.
No, I think you're right. I think what I would like to see is that this board evolve, and I think, it's the chairs or the board as a whole's discretion, but that we do develop a policy, and it should be reviewed by this board as to what options are within it, and I think it'll give us a framework to work within. This is one, I think, Ken had a chance to review this before. The concern that the only concern, not the only concern, but perhaps the major concern we had here is that this is rather constrictive as far as term of investments, that you can't go out more than 1 year, which is, in this day and age, pretty short. Obviously, the further you go out, you start rising the risk level, but I think we should be cognizant of these things, and this,
I think the bottom line here is that, and none of this is new to you, Tom, is that this is an account that really should be on autopilot to the extent possible. There's especially in this interest rate environment, particularly in this interest rate environment, there's very little to be gained by having our town officials spending a lot of their labor time on it. So to the extent that we can get a policy in place, and this is actually a pretty good policy with a couple of small changes that Paul alluded to, and then going forward from there, I think we can remove a lot of the time that's being spent, and there's probably a lot of other things that you guys could be doing with your time that would be more beneficial for the town.
Mr. Tetra, you had a comment, and then I'm going to go to Mr. DeWitt. I saw your hand come up after.
Yes, Mr. Chair, given both the comments and the fact that we got this handed out 15 seconds ago and haven't had time to review it, I concur with Mr. Brackfeld, and so I move that we set up a subcommittee to review this and report back to the board.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tetra, I'll come back to you maybe for a motion. Mr. DeWitt, did you have a comment?
No, I was just procedurally curious if we could make a motion to create a subcommittee if that was a Board of Selectmen activity, but I think we can, right?
We've done it in the past.
I mean, if we make it, first of all, Mr. Chair, it was a motion,
Yeah.
but second.
That's all I was going to say. I was just.
You did, yeah, I mean, you did
I
did
did
want
make
to
the
do it in a
motion,
form of a...
so I was
So
looking
do I have
for
a
it.
second to that, Mr. DeWitt? Okay.
And then in terms of discussion on that, just that if we're talking about a subcommittee of the Board of Finance,
Yeah, we can do
we can
it.
do that at your discretion as to who and perhaps what other folks may serve on.
Yeah. Let me, any other questions, comments, concerns on this item before we, okay, so my own, my own thought on this item, and I want to open this for discussion. I don't know how broad we want to make this subcommittee, if we want to leave it at a Board of Finance level, working directly with the chief fiscal officer and the first selectman. And then, depending on what that recommendation is, maybe we bring it out to a broader group after that. But I think having a kind of a tighter group around this now makes some sense to me. Personally, I want to throw that out for your consideration. The other thing is, as Mr. Hiller was speaking before, and Ken, I want to ask you, the investment policy, I think, is a large part of it, but as we saw earlier this evening, as Mr. Stone and Mr. Kiley brought forth, there's a lot of cost related to our cash management situation as well. So it's almost a discussion not just of investment policy, but also of cash management practices and best practices. And to be clear to anybody watching at home or in the audience, this is not about the pension funds. This is about operating funds of the town. This is about the cash float of the town between collecting mostly tax revenue and then paying our expenditures. So it is purely within your area of function and expertise, Mr. Hiller. So related to cash management policy and investment policy. And my view would be that whatever the subcommittee is should probably look at both. Do you agree with that? Mr. Brockfield first.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, as we're learning here, in spite of the fact that we're going to set up, thanks to Mr. Kiley's recommendation, a second line item to show us the expenditure versus the revenue. In spite of that,
Yeah.
much like the issue with the dump, it's a netted number, and at the end of the day, it's one bottom line. So, again, I'll repeat what I said before, especially in this interest rate environment, and based on Dr. Bernanke's first press conference ever today, there's no indication that we're going to have a major change in interest rates in the foreseeable future. Saving money on the cost side is the exact same thing as earning money on the revenue side. So it would go without saying that I think if what you're alluding to is what the charge of the subcommittee is,
Yeah.
the answer is yes.
Yeah, that's what, I'll go to Mr. Tetram, then I want to hear from some others.
And, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, if the charge of that committee is to research and make a recommendation, it's not that we're necessarily setting policy at that point, but
Yep.
just to come back, make a recommendation to the, and again, I'm assuming it's Chief Fiscal Officer and the Board of Selectmen that, or the First Selectman that would
First,
actually have to agree on that policy, but at least we could do our part
Yep.
in terms of making a recommendation back to that.
Exactly, which is why perhaps keeping it as a closer knit group has some appeal.
and it is a finance issue.
Exactly.
Right.
Does anybody, how do others feel on this topic?
agree.
Mary, you, Jim? Agree. No.
And just to add in concur, I think your expansion of that to include the costs and that piece is also very important, because that is directly one of other responses we get into.
So can you take that as an amendment to your motion to form the subcommittee?
With your permission, I'll amend it exactly as you said it.
So do we have that? It's to form a subcommittee of the Board of Finance to work in concert with the first selectman as well as the chief fiscal officer on a cash management and investment policy for the town. And the subcommittee would be to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Hiller, would that be correct? Or would it be to the
I'd
first?
have to go back
select-
through the charter, really, to look at that. I think it's really both boards. I think it's the Board of Selectmen and to the Board of Finance, really.
Fair enough. I'm fine with that as part of the charge. So we would like the subcommittee to come back and make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance on what that policy should be. Mr. Brockfeld?
Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, just as long as we're writing it up, does the Board of Selectmen have anything to do with this? I mean,
On a
strikes,
day-to-day basis, no.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
I'd like
it's
it to
really.
be formalized, though. Yeah, Mr. Tetram?
I think, Mr. Chair, if we make the recommendation to the First Selectman, then it would be the First Selectman's obligation to step it through any approval process, be that this board or the Board of Selectmen, because it would probably have to pass the Board of Selectmen then here, if that were the approval process.
Right.
If it's just the First Selectman and the Chief Fiscal Officer, then that would happen.
I'll tell you what, let's, if we can we leave what that ends process is right now and allow Mr. Hiller and I to do some research
Sure.
as to what our obligation is? Because what I don't want to do is form this subcommittee and then find out that we're making the recommendation to the wrong body. So I want to be very clear. What we'll do is in the charge, we'll say to make a recommendation to the appropriate town authorities as to what the policy should be, and then we'll report back, okay? And I know, as I said, well, let's form the subcommittee first. So is there any other discussion on this? Okay, and I guess we'll put the subcommittee that I will set as chairman, I will appoint the appropriate people from the Board of Finance, okay? Any questions, comments? Okay, all in favor of forming the subcommittee? Opposed, abstentions, okay. What I will do is I will ask for each of you, anybody who is interested in being on the subcommittee, to just email me that they're interested. I already know, and I'm already going to tell you I'm putting Mr. Brockfeld on it because he's been championing this from the start.
How big is it?
I'm going to think 3 people is what I'm going to say. So if you're interested in being a member of the subcommittee, please get back to me. Then I will gather the names, and if nobody gets back to me, I'll reach out to some people. and then I will report back to the body who will be on the subcommittee, and we'll work together with Mr. Hiller and the first selectman on that. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you very much. So that's on the cash investment policy. And then to review the recommendation of the Audit Committee on the appointment of an auditor for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2011. I think our Audit Committee chairperson wants to say something?
Well, I have to apologize. I didn't know this was going to be on the agenda till I opened up the packet. So we didn't really, with the holiday weekend, have a chance to meet. I'm going to recommend that maybe we could do a conference call this week, and maybe we could report back to the board at our next meeting.
Which is next Tuesday?
Right.
So it's Ken, right, and Jim?
Jim.
And Mary? Can you guys get together before next Tuesday? I need to ask, I saw your hand, Mr. Tetra, but Mr. Hiller, what's our time frame obligation here to appoint?
It's on the agenda, which I distributed this evening. There is an item for Tuesday evening for the appointment of the auditor. We have, when this was briefly discussed at the, excuse me, at the meeting 3 weeks ago, I guess, I don't think Mrs. Leclerc was there. And we have a draft, or the engagement letter from Costin Rufkus for basically the same services as last year. The fee is slightly higher. The fee is below the price that they bid when we last bid this 2 years ago, so this would be the 3rd year on that bid. Their fee is $90,000, of which $5,000 would be covered by the pension fund, and that is within the budgetary line. There seemed to be some consensus at the board meeting of earlier this month, obviously to not do an RFP at this time.
There was, does any board member have any specific concern with the audit firm that we've been using in recent years, or any comments they would like to make regarding that audit firm right now? Mr. Stone, did you have something?
I have no objection to the firm. I'm just, is $90,000? It just seems like a real high figure, but I guess spit it out. I don't know. Am I right?
My experience, my
don't know.
personal experience in my corporation, that is not a high figure
Okay,
for a company that size.
all right.
I don't know, Mr. Kiley, you're very familiar with this as well. What's your thought?
No, that's not a fee that's high. I pay more than that for my company.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a question on this item, though. It doesn't pertain to the audit firm or wanting to engage with them or not, but could we just get some clarification from them on that entry from last June, the $104,000 that seemed to be made in error? So that must have gotten through the audit, that particular entry?
I will check
Could
on
we just
that.
get some clarification on how that was vetted, or
Report back
possibly
on
what
that
the
Monday
process
night.
was?
Tuesday night, rather, I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. That's an excellent follow-up. Any other questions, comments, concerns with the audit firm or anything? Mrs. Leclerc and I have spoken, and, my thoughts was they've actually gotten better each year that we've used them. I've been more impressed with them and what they've done. That's a personal opinion, and I know Mrs. Leclerc said the same thing. What I would like to do is ask for the audit committee to meet, though, and have your recommendations ready for next Tuesday night. And assuming that I haven't heard any specific concerns here, so assuming the audit committee doesn't come up with any specific concerns, I think we can move forward,
Okay.
if that's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Paul, could I ask you to email the audit committee a copy of the engagement letter you received and the price and everything?
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc.
The audit committee is yourself,
Mr. Brown
Mr. Brown.
and Mr. Brockfeld. Great. Any other questions, comments on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll close that up on Tuesday night. And the last item was very specifically to charge the Budget Subcommittee, chaired by Mr. Bolito here, to start the review process of the 2012 budget review. So do you have any things you want to say? Go ahead.
One request would be if we can give our report earlier than November this year, that might be nice. I know that we got waylaid a little bit last year. Also, in terms of the enforcement of some of the recommendations, it's happened in the past where we've made recommendations and we've all agreed on them, and then they've kind of gone by the wayside in the course of business, which is, it happens, it's human nature, but I would like to see perhaps the enforcement of some of the recommendations stepped up so that, there's some merit to what we're doing as a committee. So that's all I would add. Thank you.
Some enforcement. Okay. You'll clarify those comments as we go forward through the process, if you will. Last item, a couple things in the news recently that I just think I've gotten some context and some comments from some citizens, and I'll just bring it up formally here, that I think we have a very strong and talented board that I've said a number of times that I'm proud to be a member of. And because of that, we've had some members that are being considered for different offices. And as we're entering the political season here, people have said to me, gee, how's that going to be on that board with members seeking new positions and going for different jobs? And my response has been, and I just want to say it formally here, my response has been that knowing the board members as I do and considering not only colleagues but friends, I have no concerns whatsoever that during this time period it's going to be business as usual for our board because they're the utmost professionals that I know. And I think that'll continue on through the course of the next many months as we play out the political season here. So it hasn't been a concern of mine whatsoever, and I mean that very sincerely, but I thought I would address it because it is out there in the ether as to how that might change the dynamic of our board. And I don't see it changing it at all. So anyway, best of luck to everybody on that score.
Is there anybody here who's not running?
Exactly. And we'll go from there. Note that Ms. Stenick raised her hand.
She's way too happy about that.
So best of luck to everybody, and I'm sorry for the lateness of the hour. I think we accomplished a lot in our financial review. I'm sorry some of the other points weren't as detailed as we would have liked. Mr. Tetra.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up point. We passed a policy on bonding, I think, at
Yes.
our last meeting, and I think the policy was going to get out to us, and I think we'd asked for a clarification of who else was going to be on the distribution list for that policy, and I was hoping we might cover that at some point.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro, and it wasn't, and I actually had a note from that from Monday night because someone alluded to it. I don't even remember actually asking for a clarification. I think we asked very specifically that it be distributed. At least that's what I remember.
I was trying to be subtle.
Yeah.
yeah, the,
To the RTM, to the Board of Education, and to the Board of Selectmen. It was
included,
distributed, I
that
think.
policy in form is included in the last page of the minutes of which was just distributed tonight to be adopted on on this Tuesday night, and we can, I think,
Well, our policy's been adopted.
yeah, but, well, the minutes reflect that, and we will distribute it at that time.
Okay, can we just make sure we very specifically send out the bonding policy separate from minutes? I don't want it lost.
Absolutely.
In anything. Let's send it to everybody in the world.
Mr. Chair, could we
Yeah.
get an email copy of that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you.
Right, because I only sent mine to you, Paul, and Linda as internal.
Yeah, and then I asked that it be
I think I have
distributed, and I
that.
thought it was, but I thought it was to this board anyway. No?
No,
Maybe I
It
misunderstood.
never came back out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Any other questions, comments,
One
concerns?
other
Yeah.
comment, and this relates to hopefully Tuesday, I say hopefully Tuesday night's meeting. First off, I can give you, if you'd like, what I refer to, as you're aware, you received 3 different emails from me yesterday. You were copied on 3 different emails. There have been, at Monday night's RTM meeting, there were 3 various proposals. I can pass out these, what I'll call the scorecard for Monday night's meeting, which lists the cuts as they were enacted by the Board of Selectmen, by the Board of Finance, and the 3 various proposals that were put forward on Monday evening. In that light, maybe with the exception of Mr. Kiley, current membership of this board doesn't remember nights when we went into the second or third night on the Monday night meeting. As a result of that, there is the potential, because of the length of this, that this board may not be able to meet until Wednesday night. I have reserved this room for both Tuesday night and Wednesday night because of the potential that the RTM may not finish their business Monday night.
Yes, Mr. Kiley.
I'm sure you've already checked on this, but should they not, are we still within our 30 days? Doesn't it get tight?
30 days.
Isn't there a 30-day window between,
Now, the 30-day window really was that we have to deliver a budget 30 days in advance of their annual meeting.
30 days in
May
advance of their
2nd.
meeting,
So
okay.
we've done that, or the Board of Finance
So
has met
that's
that
good.
requirement. Our problem is until they come and say, here's the final number, we don't have to do it. And the other thing I would add to that, one of the variables that we are still working with is the action of the Board of Assessment Appeals. The Board of Assessment Appeals has met as of this afternoon. They were meeting again at 5 o'clock this afternoon, are scheduled for tonight, tomorrow night, and Monday. They have 182 cases still to act on. I will also give you the forewarning on that, that the early action of that board has reduced the mill rate by a greater amount than we had anticipated. And that's with 182 cases still to be heard.
Did you say reduce the mill rate or increase the mill rate?
Have reduced the grand list by an amount greater than we had estimated.
Mr. Chair, just, I know that normally the tax collector joins us on the evening that we consider the mill rate. If the tax collector or any other guests, perhaps they could be notified that we may have our meeting on Wednesday night as opposed to Tuesday.
The tax collector is scheduled to be here to present the suspense list for a prior year.
Right, and also the
And I
collection
will-
rate.
Mr. Gorzolani is aware of the potential. Virtually all departments are impacted by the number of cuts. You saw the distribution list.
So essentially, we have 2 items in play right now that could delay our meeting from next Tuesday night to next Wednesday night. The 2 items, the actions of the RTM on the expense side, and the Board of Assessment Appeals, which, as you said, has 182 cases pending before them as of today, and has 3 or 4 days to get through that all. Correct? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if we need to, if they need to get through 182 cases, that's going to be 3 or 4 days. Are we sure that they can get done by Tuesday? Are we sure they can get it done by Wednesday?
Mr. Brown was confident. When I talked to Mr. Brown, and I'll talk to him tomorrow morning and perhaps send an email out to, as to what progress is made this evening. They were meeting at 5 o'clock tonight. They're scheduled to meet tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. I don't know. He seemed to feel that they could conclude their work Monday evening, the Board of Assessment Appeals.
What happens if they don't?
At that point, I think it's a question as to how many cases have they got left, and what's the magnitude, and do we estimate from there? I mean, you have the right to set a mill rate based on You know, there's one other factor that we still don't know.
What are we legally required to do, though? If they set it on, if the RTM concludes their business, are we legally required within that period of time, meaning the next night, to set
I'd
the
have to
mill
check
rate?
with the town attorney for certainty on that. I think, you know, you may have, there's a period, of course, there's the potential of a referendum, obviously. But as far as setting the mill rate under the charter, it always comes following the annual meeting. I think the difficulty here is, obviously, the mill rate is contingent upon a valid figure for a grand list, and at this point in time, we don't have that.
Mr. Stone?
Personally, knowing what's going on, I think the meeting probably our meetings probably should be Wednesday. But the other thing is, what about wasn't there a lawsuit going on too, with the assessments? Wasn't some group by the beach?
There are 20 cases that have been transferred to Superior Court under the, because they are commercial properties. I'm not familiar with
I
any.
thought a bunch of people got together and hired a lawyer. Maybe I...
There's a bunch of people who have hired the same attorney and the same appraiser basically in Southport Village, in some very high-end homes on Harbor Road, Willow, you know, the streets, Pequot Avenue, that area. And I believe they were going into those appeals this evening.
Okay, so that will be resolved? Can
Well,
it
I
go
think
on
they'll be
further?
resolved. You always have, because the other remedy that people have, because not everyone's getting a reduction. The remedy is also, is to take an appeal to the Superior Court, even if you don't like what they've done. That remedy is always out there. So, I mean, the question is, and we've always had some reserve for that. You know, I go back 5 years ago, and it's really in the ensuing year after that that perhaps some of those reductions are seen, because those court cases can take an exceedingly long time before they're adjudicated.
Okay.
Not exceedingly long, but, you know, certainly not within the 14 months that we're looking at.
Mr. Kiley?
No, he was
Oh, okay,
Mike-
Mr.
Mike was
Tetch, I'm
first.
sorry.
Thank you. Kind of building on Mr. Stone's question, given the charge of this board is to set a mill rate for this year and trying to understand what impacts that, would it be reasonable to have a schedule of the commercial properties that are currently in court or legally challenging what the assessment is? Will that impact this year, or will that impact the year in which those are finally?
We have always, in the calculations for the mill rate, we've always kept a nominal reserve for that, because
When you
if
say,
anything,
excuse me, when you say we have always kept a nominal reserve for that, who is the we?
is part of the mill rate calculation that I've presented to this board.
Okay, do we see what that reserve is at any point?
We haven't always disclosed that. I can't, I'm prepared to give a chart. In some years, it's been as much as a 7 or 8, and it decreases as you get further away from the reval year. The reserve for that would really come into play more in fiscal year 13, when those cases would be adjudicated.
Okay, so you're basically saying if they take it to court, there's no tax impact, and they pay the mill rate per their assessment of whatever we
They
do. There's
do,
not-
if they're in court, they do have the right to only pay 90% of the tax due without penalty. We have not had people, to my knowledge, who have taken advantage of that, but they do have that right under the statute.
Yeah, is it possible to get a list for the unresolved cases or the cases that we know are going to court? What I'm trying to do is get a handle on what our risk is there, so we can kind of comprehend that, given this is the year of a reassessment, given this is the concern.
And I would think that has to go into your calculation, that assessment has to go into your calculation on whatever your quote-unquote reserve is, right, Mr. Hill?
It does, but as I say, that normally, we would take that calculation more heavily in fiscal 13, because the opportunity to resolve those cases within the next 14 months is
Right, but
not
if they have
strong.
the ability to only pay 90% of their tax bill, it would seem that this board should know what that number
What that exposure is.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to get to.
Ba-
just-
Basically, it's enough detail around the reserve so that we can get comfortable that it's
We
enough.
can generate that, I'll have Mr. Brown generate that list as far as, I believe the number is 20.
All right, thank you. If that took till Wednesday, that would make more sense than trying to force it through on Tuesday, that's all.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Kiley?
Mr. Chairman, for your consideration, I'm sitting here listening and hearing about the 167 cases, and I'm looking at this document, which I think in a perfect world might get done by 2 o'clock in the morning on Monday night and could very well linger to Tuesday. Do we want to consider, while we're here tonight, and we can talk as a group, pushing our meeting to Wednesday anyway, so that we can work our lives around it, or,
I don't
because
know
the
that
dust
we-
has to settle after they do everything, too.
Yeah. I don't know that we have that opportunity. I mean, what's the, I would agree with you, but I don't know what our requirement is.
Are we required to meet within a day?
Within a day, right. That's what I want to understand.
Okay.
That I don't know.
Right, and, but that
I
was
know-
always my quote-unquote understanding of it. But that could have just been urban myth. But it was always, you know,
The next night.
Yeah, the next night, and it was always meant that it was.
There was one night I remember back in the 90s where the RTM took 3 nights and, pushed it out. But
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Oh, is Monday night's meeting here or Osborne Hill?
the Monday night, oh, I should mention that the Monday night
It's
meeting.
McKinley.
McKinley.
It's at McKinley.
It's at McKinley.
McKinley.
It's not here, because it was here 2 years ago, wasn't it? Or was it last year?
Monday
Last
night's,
year,
Monday night's
there was-
RTM meeting is at
Yeah.
McKinley.
So it's McKinley, okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Then building up, Mr. Kiley said, could we make a motion, I don't know, I guess for all of us, for some of us anyway, planning for next Wednesday, I'm already booked for next Wednesday night, so I would like the maximum amount of time to switch that around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really like Mr. Kiley's suggestion, subject to the qualifier so if, and Mr. Chair, I think if, you don't need us to vote, you can just set the meeting
I can
schedule.
just
correct?
set the meeting. So what I'll do is what I intended to do is we'll follow up, see what we're allowed to do,
What our options are.
what our options are. If our options are to push it, everybody, we might just push it sooner rather than later. If that's not an option, then we're just going to have to play it by ear.
All right. And the other,
If you could let us know, just got some out-of-town guests coming in that I'd like to rearrange.
Yeah.
and the other technical option might be, even if there is a requirement to meet the next day, and I don't know that there is, if they finish after 12 o'clock,
Is it the next day?
I don't know what the next day is. Is it Tuesday or is it Wednesday?
Or
So-
we meet for breakfast, call into the meeting, and postpone everything till the following day, right?
Any other
My
questions?
guess is it'll be midnight at the least, based on what I'm looking at here.
Yeah, any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. DeWitt?
I bet you're right.
I just want to preface this by saying, I don't want to start a one-hour discussion, but I just want to be clear in my own mind. Does the changes that are proposed here to the Board of Ed budget, do they affect any of our agreements we had with the Board of Ed regarding our $450,000 of,
No, it does not. They passed,
A resolution, oh, sorry.
they passed.
Okay, so the internal service fund won't be adversely affected by an additional cut to the Board of Ed budget? Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement based on what has been represented to this body.
Thank you, okay.
So, any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, do I have another motion? Mr. Bolito, seconded by Mr. Brown. All in favor? Opposed? Abstention? We are done until next week, date uncertain. Thank you, everybody. That was a nice quick meeting.